Morning, everyone. Morning, Commissioners, Chief Moore, Mr. Tifank, Madam Secretary, Mr. Inspector General, and City Attorney. Today's April 19th, 2022. It's 9:30 a.m. This is a special meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning, Commissioner Briggs, absent. Commissioner Decker, absent. Commissioner Bonner.
Here.
Commissioner Kalanche. Here. Commissioner Sobroff.
Here.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Also present, we have the Executive Director, the Chief of Police, the Inspector General, and the City Attorney. Mr. President.
Thank you. On April 7th of this year, Mayor Garcetti and City Council President Martinez announced that effective May 4th of this year, a couple of days ago, along with the reopening of City Hall, that the City Council will also resume in-person meetings. Proof of vaccination or proof of a negative test within the last 72 hours will be required to enter the building, and indoor masking will continue to be required. They also required that City Council committees and commission meetings and other Brown Act meetings, including the meetings of the Los Angeles Police Commission, will remain virtual until prior notice. So here we are virtually. We welcome everyone this morning. All public comments will be heard during item number 2 on the agenda. We will dedicate a total of 45 minutes to public comment. Members of the public will have 1 minute per agenda item for a maximum of 2 minutes total. At the request of the speaker will be given 1 additional minute for general public comment for a maximum of 3 minutes total. Members of the public who participate in public comment are reminded that they can speak to any item on the agenda or a matter within the jurisdiction of the Board of Police Commissioners. Public comment is your opportunity to address this board during this meeting. You are free to express your opinion on matters before the board and to generally express when you disagree with other opinions expressed. However, directing your comments to other individuals who have spoken or attacking others who have expressed their opinions shall be deemed off topic, and your public comment period will be immediately concluded. Members of the public, if you choose to participate in the public comment portion of the agenda, you can participate in this meeting in one of a number of ways that are outlined on the agenda. This concludes the commission procedure portion of the introduction. Let's go to item number 1, the report of the Chief of Police. Good morning, Chief. Chief, it's on mute.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you. Mr. Inspector General, Mr. City Attorney, Mr. Tifank, welcome the opportunity to give a briefing again on our COVID-19 update, significant events, including a categorical investigation involving an in-custody death, crime, and our personnel strength. Regarding COVID, this last week, we saw an additional 6 new COVID cases. That brings our total to 5,275. As a reminder, last week, the number had increased by 1. So this is a slight increase as far as the velocity of this. Of the 6 new cases, 5 of them by our records were of individuals that have been previously fully vaccinated. I am grateful to report that we have no new hospitalizations. We remain with 1 critical care individual officer that has been a long-term COVID case. We now have with these new 6 cases, we now have 32 people that are home recovering from this. That's an increase of 5 from last week. Moving next to significant events. This past week, I attended, just a moment. So last week, I had the honor of attending the 63rd annual YMCA Good Friday breakfast and provided the keynote address. I wanted to recognize this event as the leadership of the Y during these last 2 years have been extraordinary. Full disclosure, I'm a member of the board of directors there. But what we've seen with the Y, which services more than 265,000 members across the LA County area, is that during this pandemic, is they really stepped forward to determine what could they do and how could they operate to service the needs of Angelenos in such a crisis time. Their addressing of food insecurity was made with more than 4.8 million meals delivered over this period of time. This event on Good Friday was an opportunity to share not just the success in that area, but the 84,000 showers that they provided to those that were unhoused and other supportive services, and more than 1,500 vaccinations each day at each of their participating branches. The leadership of the Y, I think, is representative of the best in NGOs and community-based organizations that work together in times of crisis, as well as our day-to-day to improve the lives of people throughout our region. Second event I was able to attend was a recognition awards luncheon, if you will, that was hosted by the Condor Squadron in the San Fernando Valley out of the Van Nuys Airport. There, we had 4 of our personnel from the Foothill area: Sergeant Joseph Castani, Officer Robert Sherlock, Damian Castro, and Christopher Aboit, who were able to meet with Mark Jenkins. And Mark Jenkins, as a point of reminder, was a pilot that, on taking off upon the airport out of the San Fernando Valley northeastern part, had an engine failure for an unknown reason and had to crash land his aircraft onto the railroad tracks that adjoined nearby the airport. Officers responded to that tragedy and were able to rescue him just moments before a Metrolink train barreled through that location. This was all captured on videotape, but the officer's body worn and received a lot of media attention. But I wanted to draw attention to this because, again, and this is another example of community members and organizations throughout Los Angeles that, upon seeing heroic acts and the day-to-day service of our men and women, that go the extra mile, take the extra moment to call them out and to say thank you and to recognize them. This was also an opportunity for Mr. Jenkins to share his remarks and his experience with those officers, and again, humanizing all parties involved with this. And it was an honor to be there and to recognize the heroic action of these officers on what was otherwise a typical day. And it was something I enjoyed a great deal. Next, I'd like to talk about is an unfortunate incident involving an in-custody death that occurred on the 17th of April in the central area of downtown Los Angeles. On the day before the 16th at approximately 11:40 at night, Central uniform officers responded to a radio call of a violent person with mental illness who was reportedly armed with a knife and a wrench in the 200 block of West 6th Street in an apartment at that location. There, Central officers arrived and identified an individual later identified as Nicholas Woodson, a male, black, 29 years of age, who had barricaded himself in his apartment bathroom with several knives and a hammer. A standoff ensued for more than an hour as Central officers attempted to talk Mr. Woodson into surrendering. At some point, Mr. Woodson stopped responding to the officers' commands, and officers made entry into the bathroom and observed Mr. Woodson, who was conscious and breathing, but was in a state of a medical emergency. Officers removed Mr. Woodson from the bathroom, and LA Fire Department personnel who were standing by at the location provided medical assistance. Mr. Woodson was subsequently transported to a nearby hospital, and unfortunately there he was declared deceased at approximately 5:05 in the morning. No officers were injured during this incident, nor has there been any reported use of force during this engagement. Consistent with our categorical investigations protocols, this does constitute a force investigation division response, and those resources have now begun their investigation. We will have a critical incident video released in the coming weeks regarding the body-worn video and other evidence that's gathered in the initial stage of this. And of course, this entire matter will be brought before the Board of Police Commissioners upon the completion of this investigation. This represents the second in-custody death year-to-date that we are tracking. The autopsy results and other information relative to this to his death will be part of that investigation and will be reported in the coming weeks and months. Last year at this time, we had one in-custody death, and our average is just under one as a 4-year average. There has been no change in the number of officer-involved shootings from what my report was last week. We remain at 6 total officer-involved shootings this year. That number was 12 last year, and our 4-year average is just over 8. We've had 2 fatal officer-involved shootings this year. Last year, that number was 4, and our 4-year average is just over 3 at this time of year. Next area I'd like to report on, as I do each week, is our crime statistics. And I want to take a step back and frame that this last week was a troubling week, particularly in the 77th Southeast area of South Los Angeles. But overall, we've also seen an increase in shooting violence and homicides for the month of April, which somewhat bucks the trend that we saw in the first 3 months of 2022. This last week, to frame this, we had 34 shooting victims for the week in the city of Los Angeles. 23 of them occurred in 77th and Southeast area, a remarkably small area of town when you look at that frequency or that concentration. As we look into the circumstances underlying this spat or the spasm of increased shootings, we're finding it primarily it's street violence, individuals that by number of indications we believe are gang related, disputes that are erupting within the gang themselves and between rival gangs. And this also has had an overlap in surrounding communities in the LA County area and the surrounding cities in South Los Angeles, where we believe that some of this violence is retaliatory violence for shootings or violence that is occurring outside the city, resulting in individuals in living or identifying those areas as their turf, if you will, coming into the city. Our efforts of dealing with this have been multi-pronged. Sunday morning, I asked for a conference call involving the involved commands, as well as Reginald Zachary and his resources within the Gang Reduction Youth Development Office of the Mayor's Office. Strategies were identified to first identify that we all had a clear picture of what the underlying violence was. What were the instances, where were they occurring, and what did we know? Secondly, was to understand the outreach and engagement efforts by the GRID resources, both those that are contracted as well as non-GRID, or those that are community-based organizations that work in support of gang intervention and gang prevention. Additionally, the department shifted resources from throughout the city to bolster deployment in those 2 communities as an effort to quell further violence. Those added patrols by shifting resources in concert with the outreach and engagement to dispel rumors and false information that was permeating throughout the community, I believe showed results, where our Saturday and Sunday where we saw remarkable less levels of violence. And in fact, in the southeast area, we saw no further acts of violence. During that period of time also, though, it speaks to the problem that we have here throughout Los Angeles is too many guns in too many hands, where the added enforcement efforts resulted in 16 gun arrests in 77th Division alone. That involved 20 guns, including a number of assault rifles. These are all weapons that are meant to kill and impact the community's sense of safety through violence. I look forward to, again, our continued efforts to prosecute those that carry guns, those that use guns, and assaults and violence against others. Year to date, for the month of April, we've had 25 homicides. That number was 14 last year. And in shooting victims, 70 this year for the month of April versus 55 last year. So our work here demonstrates again the velocity or how quickly shooting violence can increase in a city such as Los Angeles, and how critical it is that our outreach and engagement, that our community partners work alongside us and work aggressively in stopping further acts of violence. Again, I want to call out a number of these organizations and thank them for digging into this and investing. Just yesterday, there was follow-up meetings again with GRID providers as well as faith-based organizations in South Los Angeles to continue to identify ways in which to quell further violence.
Chief, on those two specifics that you just gave, are there any categorical bubbles? In other words, are there certain areas that are just really where it's happening, or is it all across the board?
No, well, but I want to draw that this past 6 days, it was in the 77th Southeast portion of Los Angeles. We did see 2 homicides that were involving persons experiencing homelessness in the Foothill area, and there was also a double homicide involving a robbery, a suspected robbery, we believe, in the Pacific area. So it's not alone, it's not unique just solely to those 2 communities, but the concentration as far as a high number of 23 out of 34 shooting victims being involved in those 2 commands, I do believe is the highest concentration. We don't see that uniformly across the entire city. Year to date, that brings our number of homicides to 107 versus 109 last year. That's a reduction, that's 2 fewer. That is a 37% increase over a 2-year period. Violent crime year to date stands at a 7.1% increase. That's 575 additional violent crimes, primarily in the area of aggravated assaults and street robberies, and commercial robberies. Over a 2-year period, our violent crime now stands at a 15.2% increase. On our property crime, we're at a 10.1% increase. We see increases in every category of property crime. That's 2,535. That means burglaries, motor vehicle thefts, personal thefts. Those are all an increase over same period last year. Over a 2-year period, our greatest challenge is motor vehicle thefts, which are up 41% over a 2-year period, and burglaries, which are now increasing over a 2-year period by 3%. Fortunately, we still see overall reductions in personal theft and theft from vehicles from a 2-year period. As we focus on our work, though, it continues on the property crime side for the importance of people to lock it, hide it, keep it, to exercise good prevention, to work in community neighborhood watch, and work alongside us in providing us tips and leads about those that would prowl neighborhoods and those who would be engaged in these type of property-related crime. Lastly, I'll go to our personnel strength. As of April 9th, our sworn personnel deployment is at 9,371. That is a reduction of 19 officers from my last reported period. That is a result of our month-to-month attrition, retirements, separations, in concert with a smaller academy class starting to backfill those individuals. And so this speaks to, again, our continued effort of a need to improve our recruitment and also the placement of those recruits in academy seats to ensure that we not just maintain our staffing, but as a reminder, our goal for this fiscal year, which ends in June 30th, was to stand at 9,706 sworn members. So we're 335 fewer members on the workforce today in sworn deployment than we aim for. So we are hiring, and the critical need of your Commissioner Soboroff, your work and the personnel department and others to improve our recruitment and placement in the academy cannot be overstated. On our civilian staff, we stand at 2,668, which is an increase of 2 additional civilian professionals from our report from last week. However, we're still 174 fewer civilian positions than our authorized strength is. And in that area, the challenges that we're seeing in our hiring is a scarcity of resources in various civilian work fields. However, I want to stress to the public that going to the personnel department's city website, there are hosts of available civilian professional positions that are very important to our day-to-day operations. Many of them are one would view as non-traditional or may not identify as something that they would think a police department would utilize civilian professionals for. But I think they all represent opportunities to make a difference and to serve the people of Los Angeles in a meaningful career. And I just encourage everyone to look for those opportunities for employment. That concludes my.
Could you describe remarks. A couple of the kind of civilian opportunities that you think would be people wouldn't think of normally?
So in addition to custody services, which are those that work in our jails for custody control of those that would be arrested, as well as 911 operators, or what we call police service representatives, we also have hundreds of openings in garage mechanics and equipment mechanics, and individuals that can work administrative positions, auditing positions, and professional positions, and dealing with clerical functions and the back office, if you will. We also have forensic science positions such as fingerprint specialists and polygraph examiners and chemists that work on in our scientific labs for the various analysis that we do of blood and other evidence that's gathered. So the very wide range of opportunities that exist there, and again, we encourage everyone to look for those for potential opportunities for them to make a difference as they serve people in the city.
Do we have questions, comments for the chief, commissioners? Commissioner Kalanche? Commissioner Bonner?
Yes, please, just a couple.
Sure.
Chief, just going back to the top of the report, you just in order of the points you made. First was regarding COVID, and can you remind me or remind us what the policy is relative to the isolation period once one is tested in? And I recall at one point it was 10 days, and then it was now more recently you could return with a mask, and then it's been a little bit variable. But what is the city or department's policy relative to like the 6 new cases, assuming they don't require hospitalization?
So the city policy, which does differ, and this can be confusing to members of the public because there's state, federal, just last night, the changing of the mask requirements for airline travel. But the city's current policy, as I understand it, is that if you are tested positive for COVID, then you need a negative test to come back in a waiting period of 10 days, symptomatic or otherwise. The contact with individuals experiencing COVID has been modified that if you're not symptomatic and you are vaccinated, then the ability of the employee to remain in the workforce is there. So this is a evolving standard. We work closely with personnel department to understand what the requirements are.
And are you expecting, do you know, or are you expecting that the experience would be similar to what some are at least assume we're seeing in the broader society, which is probably more cases than are being detected, likely because if someone is asymptomatic and therefore has no reason to get tested, may just go, that case may go undetected one way or the other, right? So what is the thought along those lines in terms of the risk that they're more in the department that have contracted, the virus, but may not be detected by a test?
Well, we're a microcosm of our society. We recognize earlier reports about the underreporting of the instances of COVID exposure or COVID experiencing the COVID virus because of a lack of testing or being asymptomatic. I have some confidence that we replicate that, and but our efforts are to ensure that members, whether they're vaccinated or otherwise, continue to abide by the city standards regarding mask requirements inside our job locations, inside our office buildings, inside our workstations. And then in public settings, if we're transporting an individual or in a custody setting, then the mask requirements. However, we are seeing a significant crossover with those that are vaccinated that are also testing and showing positive for COVID. And we recognize that vaccinated or otherwise, asymptomatic or otherwise, that our workforce, like the public, are seeing instances of people being impacted by or infected by COVID. And there is a period there in which they are contagious and do pose a risk. If this is a balancing, we recognize as a society, as we open up our communities and open up our operations, that we're trying to balance the risks involved, both the public health risk as well as public safety risks, and the entirety of how we go about in our world dealing and living with this pandemic.
Thank you very much. Wanted also to go to the homicides. I think you mentioned 107 year to date, if I recall that number correctly. And I know that it's a little bit difficult to understand how many arrests are being made relative to the number of shootings, largely because investigations don't always track the data, if you will, in terms of how long it takes to complete an investigation and identify a shooter and things of that nature. But how do we get some sort of at least a snapshot? If you think about 107 homicide victims this year, what kind of snapshot could you offer us now or provide sometime in the future as to how many shooters are being apprehended and how effective the investigations are playing out in that regard?
So right now, the last 4 weeks, we've arrested 27 people for homicide. Year to date, we've arrested 119. Just this morning, I was made aware of an arrest of one of the homicides that occurred in 77th area, where their investigation has identified and we believe that we have the person responsible for a murder in the middle of the day on a busy street of another individual sitting in a car. And we look at them as we understand the motive behind it. It appears to be rumors and street information that prompted this individual to commit that murder. And he's suspected of potentially being involved in other violence as well. Additionally, we've arrested a murder suspect yesterday or last night involving a stabbing homicide that occurred on the west side that involved a person experiencing homelessness. And so we are making our investigations are working each day and night. They're working with community members. They're gathering forensic evidence, video, and other sources to identify individuals responsible. When we look over a 2-year period, we've made, as I said, 119 arrests as of the 16th. The numbers, the arrests I've just spoke about don't cover, are not including those 19 arrests. That number was a 96 2 years ago. So the results of our people, I'm proud of their work, not just the homicide detectives and the initial responding units, but our gang and narcotics division resources, our metropolitan resources that are following tips and leads and building investigations and bringing individuals we believe responsible for these murders into custody. So it's the entire organization, as we've said previously, we have shifted resources towards this violence. And we do recognize that part of and a critical need for the community is to see that such murders do not go unaddressed, and that there are consequences and individuals we believe responsible brought before the criminal justice system.
So on that, because that last point really is the thrust of the question here in terms of how does one really make that judgment one way or the other. I'm thinking like with the 100, I think some of those could be in shootings that occurred in December or earlier points of time. Some that could be very recent. So there's that challenge of you can't tie the number of arrests directly to the number of shootings in real time, if you will, because of just the nature of investigations. But acknowledging that, then how does one really get some general sense as to the degree of confidence, whether it's a member of the public or others, like, these people are really being identified, arrested, and held accountable and taken off the streets. How do you really get your mind around that, even in some general way, given the difference between the timing of the shootings and how the investigations conclude?
Well, the simplest fashion is that there's an absence of violence. So making arrests and bringing people before the criminal justice system and still having continued violence, that's an out-of-date model. We're looking to our intervention partners and the community members to interrupt this violence by stopping it from perpetuating from one event to another event to another event. And so that's what my proof is. And then back when I was looking this morning and talking with Chief Woodyard from South Bureau and asking about our efforts in shifting resources and aligning our work with GRID, what were the results? And in 77th, that's the stat of 16 gun arrests with 20 total guns, including assault rifles, a number of assault weapons that we've already tied into other street violence. So there's a consequence there that says, okay, good investigative work, solid efforts by our people to identify those responsible, and that's one measure. But another measure is in Southeast area, which had no further acts of violence after last Thursday, where we saw an individual that was murdered just outside of Nickerson Gardens. And turmoil and potential rivalry and further acts of violence that had that potential, but by the community safety partnership officers that worked in those neighborhoods through the days that followed, as well as added resources and community members that stepped in to discourage any further acts, or including acts of retaliation. We had a relatively quiet weekend, and meaning no further acts of bloodshed. And so those are the measures, how I see it, on a tactical way. Of course, we step back and look at our clearance rate for last year for homicides, 66%. The year before that, it was 56%. Across the country, we saw clearance rates, homicide clearance rates plummet. I believe the Sheriff's Department is suffering from a clearance rate well under 30% of their homicides. So one of the measures for me is when we realigned resources and we're gearing our investigative efforts towards identifying those responsible, are we getting productive results? Are we using strategies and tactics, working with the community that is proving successful, not just in making arrests, because there are agencies across the country that have made arrests that never are prosecuted. The investigations are of little quality, and they believe they have the person, but they can't. The case is of insufficient value to prosecute. So when we look at our arrest rates, it's not just whether or not we're making the number of arrests, and the number alone is less important than the quality of those arrests and the meaningfulness of those stopping people from continuing further acts of violence, which is why at times we're frustrated when we see individuals that we believe are responsible, and then they're no longer being held in custody for a variety of reasons we've talked about earlier, and they go back and they commit further acts of violence.
Well, I appreciate all that. I would say I probably, I know I spent some time with Chief Pitcher and others in this conversation earlier, and probably a good time to revisit some of that. I'm thinking, on the one hand, when you hear about the reports week to week, and especially the last couple of months, is, on the one hand, you don't want people to be indifferent if you're suggesting that, hey, this is a relatively confined problems in 77th and Southeast or in any particular part of the city. You don't want people citywide to be indifferent or rest on their laurels in that regard. At the same time, you don't want, when you're reporting the increases, you don't want people panicking, thinking, oh my God, it's out of control and you can't step outside without getting shot in LA. You don't want either of those extreme, those using the extreme. But then you get to the same question that I'm wrestling with is if someone's just saying, boy, how confident am I that law enforcement's on this, and is handling and managing and dealing with this situation. That's where you get that you can sense that, you can develop a feeling about it one way or the other. But when you get to this, what we're discussing here, there's just a lot of moving parts in terms of how one could put their finger on it and say, yes, we know how effectively this is being handled by the police department.
This takes an attitude of resilience. You have to be committed in this work that you never give up, and you're never satisfied with the results, and you always have to have a passion of working towards striving to see the numbers, the rates of violence that are still too high, go down without setting a tone that people feel that it's unsafe to go outside. So it is that balancing act, but I'd much rather, as a department, I believe it's much better in our interest to have a passion of pursuit of calmer and safer cities and safer areas of our city than it is to minimize or placate that. Well, it's not as bad as it used to be. So so we tend to err on the side of drawing these instances, these spasms of violence, to draw attention to it, because those communities are certainly experiencing it. We want them to have every faith and confidence that we haven't given up, and that we don't see this as a way of life within those communities.
Well, I appreciate that, and just say that I think it's a conversation I'll be interested in continuing as appropriate in this forum, but probably need to drill down a little bit more to understand some of the nuances that you just referenced. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Chief, two questions, or one question combined. Clubs and large parties where people rent homes and then have 400 people come over. We're seeing national stories of issues, and then we see some locals. What are your recommendations, or do you feel that there are appropriate requirements for clubs to provide security, or there? What's your observation? What's your recommendations? So
over the last few years, we have seen the use of, and this is no insult to quote unquote Airbnb, but we've seen these private rentals of homes to individuals for short-term rentals become hotbeds of violence, where groups are gathered and over instances and when you see then a shooting occur or number of suspects or individuals, sometimes rivalries, shoot at each other. And so the key here is that while there's thousands of these type of short-term rentals that occur across a city of our size, certainly your attention is drawn when you see one of these instances where you have a mass violence situation where you have multiple people that are shot and involved in the aftermath or in the midst of this otherwise party atmosphere at one of these locations. For the Los Angeles Police Department, this has particularly been critical along the Hollywood Hills and along the northern part, the southern part of the San Fernando Valley. I'm proud of the work of the captains and the command and officers in those commands along the Santa Monica mountain range, where we have seen the individuals, homeowners that have used their locations for de facto party sites. They're unlicensed. They're outside the zoning requirements, that they should not be used as a de facto commercial establishment. And I'm proud of the work that they've engaged in with the city attorney's office to deal with bad landlords, to deal with unscrupulous landlords that have hosted these events. And some of them have resulted in violence, and other times they've just resulted in a substantial amount of disruption and disturbance to an otherwise calm residential community. So this is something that I believe works best at a neighborhood by neighborhood level, working with local officers and working with our fire department as well as our city attorney to ensure that we hold landowners accountable for the responsible use of short-term rentals, and that we avoid them. And we saw this particularly in the first year to 18 months of the pandemic, when many of our clubs and entertainment locations had to shut down because of COVID health restrictions, that people transitioned into these short-term rentals as a bleed off or as a way of allowing people to gather. They were unhealthy. Dr. Ferrer and others cautioned about those being mass infection locations, but they also were dangerous in the sense of not just a disruption to the community, but we saw shootings. And I'm aware of these last 2 weeks, the instances in other parts of the country. I'm grateful that we have not seen that here in that short time.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions of the chief? We'll move to 45 minutes. So it's 10:10. We'll move to 45 minutes of public comment, and we'll turn it over to the board secretary.
Okay, our first speaker is Betty Lay, followed by Richie.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
Chief's report, agenda items, and public comment, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, well, first off, you know that I support LAPD, and I'm hoping everybody does stay healthy and safe. I thank the chief for his report. I know everyone in the department is working hard to keep everybody safe and do what needs to be done. On all the donation items on the agenda, I support those. And in public comment, I just want everyone to understand that there are officers out there that need the opportunity to be promoted. Some of them have gone years without a promotion, yet their work ethics is giving 110%. So why they're not being pushed forward, I don't understand. And again, this Bluestone company, this needs to stop. Officers should not be having to pay to be tested. Officers should not be judged on whether they're vaccinated or not, or have to stay home without pay, or being terminated. We need everybody in the department to build up, and we need to do more hiring, as Chief said. There's lots of great opportunities in the department. And with that, please, everybody stay safe, stay healthy, and I yield the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have caller ending 5521.
Hello there.
Hi, what items would you like to
Hi.
speak
Hello. Excuse me. 1, 2, and 3, please.
on? Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Bill Watkins, Hollenbeck Division area. Thanks for having me. And on 3, I appreciate the Zoom meetings. I'm wary of guns, the amount of guns in a meeting at LAPD, I have to say, bluntly. It's kind of scary. It's a scary prospect. If I go to physical meetings, I have to keep that in mind, prep myself spiritually every time I go, which we all should do. But it's, I appreciate the distance in some way. And with that, as I've shared on the Twitter link for this meeting, among other things, the United Kingdom feels who we've modeled our police after, their system. They continue, I believe, to run about 90% non-lethal out on the streets, about 90% non-lethal. And I think they have pretty good rapport. I've been there several times with the people, have consent of the people, consent of the police is really high. And I hope we continue to look at that chief and everybody, and the mayor, who I should reach out to a little more too, because I know he's a big part of this. I'm a Phi Beta Kappa from UC Santa Barbara. On the previous chief's watch, I was passed to serve with the LAPD. I took a pre-test that expressed my wariness of using lethal force. I have a feeling that hurt me. I'm a writer, so to have failed the written test with you guys is a little silly. I just don't think that was necessarily the case. And I went in to talk to people about why I passed out, why I failed you guys, and nobody gave me an answer. So that's unfortunate. That was on the last chief's watch, not this chief more. But look forward to looking at some civilian jobs, possibly. I'd like to see more along the UK lines of non-lethal policing, non-lethal security. If there was a job like that, I would apply. Even now, I don't know, maybe I'm too old, but getting near 50. But yeah, love to serve in that capacity. Aside from that, I had other things, always helicopter related. I'm always concerned that we're running on a 1970s study, whether the people here want helicopters and the amount that you guys have this operation. You call it a force multiplier quite often. Let's take a step out of your paramilitary uniform sometimes, I hope, everybody, and realize we may not want force multipliers. We got to find language and concepts that really do improve the quality of life for residents here, as your mission statement says. We got to update that study. I am a writer, so I might go out and make a study of my own. I love you guys. Thanks for all your attempts and efforts and service. Let's all do this together and make this nice.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Richie.
Hi, yes, all available items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Yes, hi, this is Richie Serdanko from the People City Council. It's great to hear that you all are talking about meeting in person again. You should set a date for when these in-person meetings will resume. City Council has set a date for in-person council meetings. And so, I think the Police Commission should do that as well. We're all really dying to get in there, really hoping to see Soboroff face to face. I want to hear him, talk about how LAPD officers have it so hard and they can't afford to live in the city of Los Angeles, despite the fact that they make $20,000 on average, $20,000 more than public school teachers do in the city of Los Angeles. And so, Soboroff, I assume that you're going to be going hard for the teachers as well, right? Just to bring up a report from Kevin Rector that came out last week about LAPD using less lethal ammunition at the same time as lethal ammunition. And just another example that reform doesn't work. And Chief Moore, I think it's funny when you use the 4-year averages when talking about LAPD killings and shootings and in custody deaths. Do you use the 4-year averages when you're talking about property crime? Do you use the 4-year averages when you're talking about shoplifting, violent crime? It's the first time I really ever hear you talk about 4-year average. It's interesting that you bring it up when talking about the LAPD violent crime, but not in other aspects. So I certainly see what you're doing there. You know, no, I mean, this commission already approved 12% budget, the proposed 12% budget increase. So Briggs isn't here, not sure what he's doing, but the commission is just a lackey for LAPD, sign off on all of this violence. Another report came out, I believe this morning, about the officers that were lying about people and putting them into the gang database. They're not going to be charged. The charges are dropped. And so yet another example of LAPD not being held accountable. They will never be held accountable under this system. You know, I think it's something like almost 5,000 racial bias complaints that have been filed against the LAPD in the past few years. None of them have been upheld. And so the city just hands over a bunch of money, signs off on the violence by LAPD. Soboroff is trying to find these fucking murderers' houses. Soboroff, big fan of community safety policing. Officer William Dorsey Jones killed down.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have caller ending 3146.
Hi.
Hi, what items did you like to speak on?
I'd like to speak on the some false police reports, the MOUs, the chief report, public comment.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thanks. Well, I'd like to start at least this way. I think speaking to the commission, you know, I think it's a good thing that the people are winning, and I think that you would be interested in that. That's slowly succeeding in doing what the people have said. The LAPD is doing that. So the people and the LAPD should feel good, right? The morale should be high. Both sides are winning. The morale should be sound. The morale should be good. We all should take a second to reflect, okay, that the demonstrations, the donations, the lawsuits, the new legislations are reshaping policing. Those who came before me, the commission, I think that the people that came before me should be proud of their work, right? Recently, they shot a guy. They only shot him once. That was good. And recently, there was a guy driving a car. He got out of the car, started running with the gun. The officer only shot him once. Okay, this is at least improvement. So let me speak now about things I'm still extremely upset about. One thing I have to make a correction. There were 66 out of policies, right? Out of 10,000, that's wrong, because there's only about 4,000 on patrol. So it's 66 out of about 4,000. Let me make that correction. So what I left with last time is false police reports, right? And this is badge tarnishing. Jones went in with at the Burlington on a report that the guy had a gun. 2 people died. The caller not charged with a crime, and that is tarnishing the badge of Jones. You see, I want to protect the police officers. Okay, that caller should be arrested. Joseo Guerrera, caller said he was shooting a gun, had no gun. Caller should be charged. This guy was shot once in the arm, though, right? They didn't kill him. God bless that. Thank you. That's improvement. Let's reflect on that improvement. I hope it keeps going, though, right? But to protect the rank and file, Jones in this situation, I wouldn't have him in this situation. They need to be protected this way, right? And that is the only way to protect the community. The only way to protect the community was if they were protecting the officers. That's not happening. I speak about this, I sound bad, right? No time left. The MOUs are inflaming racism. This has to stop. I'm glad I know about this. But you lawyers were standing there like you didn't know about it. That's a lie. And the training handbook, the protocol doesn't line up with the law governing the MOUs. Glad I know that. And who went along with this? Where
Okay, thank you. Next, we have T.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, what items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Power and strength to all the families murdered by law enforcement. I think we're up to like 700 over a 7-year span. Not one officer pig has been held accountable. Chief, you need to keep that, excuse me, more, because Chief is an insult to indigenous folks here on Turtle Island, stolen land. He opened with y'all talking about murdering another person. Another black man had a knife and a wrench. Y'all SWAT teamed his house. He had himself locked in a bathroom when he needed medical help. Imagine if a Met team showed up, non-law enforcement, not armed, unarmed non-law enforcement health professionals showed up, that gentleman would still be alive. Every week I'm hearing about a black and brown body y'all are killing. He needs to keep that same energy he does for the community, talking about gangs and murderers and guns on the street. What happened to the guns stolen from the LAPD store that y'all were investigating? Where are the rest of those guns? Okay, y'all killed 12 people in 2021. Now we're up to 7 in 2022. He opens his discussion with the murder of this man, right? We need independent investigations because police cannot investigate themselves. The coroners, we need independent coroners reports because we all know that you work and operate together to paint your own narrative on the news and the media to get more funding. Like y'all need more training, right? And we know that this is not a fact. More training doesn't lead to our safety. What community safety looks like is no police in our community and services in our community because y'all don't prevent crime. Y'all cause crime. Again, we need independent investigations, right? And in addition, right, he is taking up an incredible amount of time on he needs to cut it. His time, we need police, decrease Moore's time in police commission meetings and open public comment with no restrictions. 45 minutes is ridiculous in a city of 4 million people. And y'all continue to eat up our budget when we clearly need them for services. 3.8 billion a year. And y'all keep asking for more funding when we're in the midst of a housing crisis, right? And again, Steve Soboroff has his investments in developers that are pushing gentrification and houselessness. Y'all are criminalizing houselessness and causing public safety issues. I think 5 houseless people die on the streets a year. A woman got hit by a car. It's unsafe for people to live on the streets. We need to house them. We need mental health services. We keep saying the same thing time and time again. And y'all.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have caller ending 2992.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. All items in general comment, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Speaking up and not going with the program can sometimes be perceived as being a problem. When wanting to promote, you often have to walk a fine line. I recently polled some officers. If you could have command staff speak out for more for what's right, what issues would you want them to advocate for? I will read a few of the responses. Stop relying on the advice and input of woke city hall staffers younger than the age of most of our children. Somebody's got to be the adult in the room and stand up for law and order for the love of God. Crime is at an epidemic levels, which many people are quick to associate with crime rates of the 90s. I'm sorry, but in the 90s, victims were of their own poor choices and circumstances because it was a crack epidemic. Crime of 2022 is going to the West Side, people walking their kids or leaving watch repair shops. Next, I want command staff to be honest about the pressures placed on them rather than gaslighting us like it's best for the department. And then ask us how they can better balance what they have to do while building morale and supporting patrol officers. We know that they are looked at to be a certain way. They can at least be honest with us. Next, complaints and 128s. Cops are afraid to do their job. Next, keep politics out of police work, enforce the law. Next, stop deploying ghost cars and pay overtime to cover the shift short officers. Next, treat all of your officers and civilians like adults, not like children. Next, pre-tech policy is deterring officers from doing police work. Next, I'm getting a PhD in organizational leadership and writing my dissertation on the department. Leadership in this department has become a narcissistic position. We have watch commanders telling us we don't matter, and our watch commander will play the race card if she gets any pushback. It's scary to try to voice your opinion or feelings right now. Morale is so low, and as a baby P2, it is exhausting. We're so quick to get complaints, but the commendations we received since August haven't even been inputted. Resources for DV victims are so outdated. It took us 4 hours in another county to find a victim in her children's shelter. It was terrible. Make more of the inside jobs as temporary loans to prevent career admin P2s who hide inside and provide insight to the decision makers. Next, saying an NTC for saying the word shit, that should speak volumes of the mentality of command. Next, it was my dream to be LAPD since I came from an LAPD family. My parents worked from the 70s to the 90s and only ever talked about how great this department was. Now I got 5 years on, the dream is a nightmare. I blame command 100% for destroying this department. Lateraling is the only thing I can think of to better my life for me and my family. Next, we're losing PSRs left and right. We are super short, and tenured PSRs are jumping ship before even being eligible to retire. And the new ones who are subjected to being made cry at times are also realizing what a circus this place is and then leave to another agency or revert back to their formal job. During COVID, we were the only clerical class that had to come to work. Next, Eileen Decker and Liz Rose are destroying the department. This is all we have time for today, but command staff, I would encourage you all to start speaking up for things that you know are wrong, like pretext stop policy, preferably before it's too late. Thank you. I yield my time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Christian.
All items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Any demands to defund, disarm, dismantle, abolish police is complete insanity. It will result in total chaos, mayhem, robberies, rape, murder. It will be living the movie The Purge in real life. Please ignore any of these voices and listen to us, law-abiding citizens. LAPD does get a lot of money, and we do expect good service. I don't think our taxes should go up, and I don't think they should be defunded, but LAPD needs to use that money efficiently and effectively. I listened in on a neighborhood watch meeting recently where a 911 representative explained to us that only 30% of those calls are actually valid, where they would go out and needed to help people. So we need to push the 1877 Ask LAPD. What is your plan to educate the people of Los Angeles to call that for a non-emergency, so that way the lines don't get clogged up with non-emergency stuff? Because if it's just a noisy party in your backyard or in your neighbor's backyard, you don't need to call 911, because people having heart attacks or being attacked, they need to be put through right away and get help to them right away. So maybe Facebook community pages, some kind of plan to educate people to call the non-emergency number if needed. We need to improve the system we have instead of dismantling it. The voices that call to abolish, God forbid any of them ever need to call the police, because they're going to want help to come their way. It could be you the next time you land on a train track and you have 5 seconds to spare before a train hits you. Or it could be your toddler who's choking and can't breathe and an officer rescues your little child. Or it could be you being hit repeatedly over the head with a bike lock at a department store with blood dripping down all over your body. So officers are heroes and we need them. Isaiah 5:20 says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. And the 2 homeless that were killed in Pacoima, hopefully the Foothill Department can track down the killer or killers. And 5 out of 6 of the new COVID cases were fully vaccinated. Drop the mandates and give amnesty to unvaccinated officers. The vaccine doesn't work and it's risky to take it. We can't risk losing these officers. We're already too low on personnel. Last time you said it was 9390. And also, has the Board of Police Commissioners investigated Chief Moore giving favors to politicians such as Councilwoman Monica Rodriguez? We want to get to the bottom of this. Why did he grant her request to move our SLO who didn't do anything wrong? It's smart to keep the SLOs in the area they're in because they know it very well. And criminals feel emboldened since they know they can get away with it. And I'm out of time. God bless each one of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Steve Rogers.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
All items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
I want to start off by thanking Steve Soboroff for his leadership in trying to help prospective recruits, officers, to get housing. And they make good tenants, and I think that's a great idea. We need more officers living in the city of Los Angeles, so there's a connection and a partnership, and I commend you for that, Steve Soboroff, and thank you for your service for all these years. The chief reported, by the way, thank you, Chief, for noting the heroism of the foothold officers. Officers are heroes, and they do heroic actions and service every day. And it needs to be acknowledged. It needs to be acknowledged here at the Police Commission. And I know the media is listening. You should be doing a better job of acknowledging the day-to-day heroism of officers. As an example, in New York, the New York Post, a newspaper, sometimes has front page stories about officers saving a dog that fell off of a subway platform onto the tracks, and the officers did a heroic thing. We need to see more positive stories about the LAPD and not a lot of the negativity that is brought by the media. The COVID-19 situation, again, 5 out of 6 of the officers were vaccinated. It's time to change course, change direction on this issue, and stop being I don't know, either cruel or stubborn or whatever it is, but those officers who were disciplined for not taking the vaccine mandate, they need to be reinstated. They need to be supported. And we need all the officers we can get. This city should have about 12,500 officers. We have now going down to 9,371. That's unacceptable. So we need to work on that. Regarding the LAPDonline.org website, it's still outdated. I'm going to use Central Division. I don't mean to pick on Central Division, but it's First Division there. The senior lead officer contact and people assignments is completely outdated. That needs to be updated. I don't know where the neighborhood watch meetings are occurring. You can't make the connection through the site. Where are things happening? We need to have a good partnership, good communication. Crime is going up. The personal theft and the other theft that the chief mentions, people have just given up. They can't wait an hour or more, or they're frustrated, and they don't think that reporting of theft will make a difference. So that's why they don't report it. If you want to see real police work, watch Adam 12. You can see things have changed, but the more things change, the more they remain the same. Too many guns in too many hands. We have too many guns in the wrong hands. People need to be able to protect themselves. The Second Amendment. We need gun enhancements and gang enhancements for crime. Recall George Gascon.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Nini.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, what items did you like to speak on?
All of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Oh, I just wanted to highlight and talk about the fact that LAPD's budget has increased, and in just Garcetti's tenure or in his term alone, it's increased 52%. And so this constant thing about defunding, or the fact that like resources are being taken away from LAPD is a dangerous lie that is constantly being touted. The after action report, one of the agenda items which talked about the updates, a 6-month update of the report, and continues to talk about, or LAPD continues to misrepresent the success of the community safety partnerships and the CSP bureaus that were established after the after action and implementation plan, where they talk about engaging the community and how they're going to continue to talk to the community. But we know from the different reports, whether it's Sarah, whether it's any other police program that LAPD has, the community that they have in mind is not the same community that we know are from the make up the majority. We know that the community stakeholders that they have in mind are people like Brian Hoffer, who come from Oakland to give presentations on something that's going to affect locally the community, and don't take into consideration the grievances and the the things that the community continues to highlight, that it's going to continue to give more toys, more dangerous toys, regardless of whether or not you call them less lethal or whatever kind of gadgets you all are trying to revise and to utilize to continue to brutalize our communities. You continue to say that you're working with the community, but we know that who you're working with are gentrifiers, are NIMBYs, are of course other state agencies as well, that continue to give you the reports and the data to justify the violence that you continue. And for example, the CSPs as well, people talked about the fact that they don't, even in the report for the Urban Peace Institute for the 2021 sites, they report and they state a lack of trusting the police, as well as inadequate access to community programs and social services. The after action report in Echo Park, just to give you an idea of how much resources are being wasted, 2 million were wasted on police salaries and overtime during the 3-day raid in Echo Park. Out of the $735,000 that the city claimed went to repairs of Echo Park, $250,000 were used to install CCTV cameras that LAPD does not want to provide us that information on, even though we've submitted PRAs for that. $104,000 to install fences. Only 4 people in Echo Park, of the Echo Park Lake residents, actually received housing, 2 who received it on their own. So tell me how successful.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Josie Sarate.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yes, what items would you like to speak on?
All of them and public comment, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Yes, the department report for donations, I am in favor of it. I know the police department has a lot of things that they put the donations to use with the community, and I'm one part of it. I'm a volunteer, and I love what they do with the community. On the report, I like the information, although I didn't understand all of it. I'm going to spend more time looking into it. Then on the verbal presentation by the chief, I did like the presentation, although again, there's certain areas that I didn't quite understand, but I will look into it. And I do want to say to Chief that I'm still asking and will continue to ask every week for either an answer from him or a town hall meeting in Lakeview Terrace to let us know why he removed Officer Contreras from our area and if the proper protocol was followed. Second of all, I want to thank whoever invented coffee with a cup. We're going to have our first one in May. Appreciate the time that Officer Porter is going to give to us, and I know we're going to be successful. And as far as people getting killed, black and brown and whatever, you know, the police department cannot do anything about it. All they can do is try to protect us, black, white, yellow, green, whatever. We need to do a better job in our communities to help the police to help us. Thank you. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Next, you have Blue.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you for the platform that you give us every week to voice our concerns and opinions. First of all, I want to say we support our police officers 100%, every single one of them. And we are proud to have them. And police officers truly do a great job to go out there to protect and serve, jeopardize their safety and their lives to protect us strangers that live in this crime-infested city, which I hate to say as a lifelong Angelino. People are delusional to think that crime and our safety situation has not gone up. I have never seen Los Angeles like this. And no, we are not pointing fingers at our police officers. We are praising them, and they are true heroes. They are doing everything they can. It's a matter of, sometimes a couple hours. They're arresting, and these criminals are back out in the streets. So hopefully this will change with a new mayor and a new district attorney. And yeah, it's something to be said when a criminal wants to tattoo Gascon's name on his forehead as an honor to him, letting him out for, murder as a reduced sentence. So thank you to our police officers. Not your fault. We praise you and we honor you and we appreciate you. And we know you're doing everything that you can. They deserve absolutely every single penny that they earn. We support their raises, we support their promotions, and we support their salaries and their retirement for dedicating their lives to save us strangers. Yes, LA is out of control. It's embarrassing. We have become the topic of every channel worldwide. Never seen it like this. It's because things are running rampant out here with no accountability and no consequences. The smash and grabs, the violence, people leaving shops, shopping. No, we cannot take our kids anymore. We cannot walk in Hollywood anymore. We cannot walk Wilshire anymore. We cannot, Mr. Bonner. No, it's, let's be real. Let's be real to ourselves that crime is rampant and we are not jeopardizing our safety and our security to go out and walk our kids anymore. So that's the realistic aspect of it. And again, let's not be delusional. Let the truth speak for itself. Thank you, Chief Moore, for recognizing, all the religious holidays. And let's not forget, this week is Orthodox Christianity. As remembering our brothers and sisters who celebrate Easter this Sunday, including the Ukrainian Orthodox. So thank you for always posting on the webpage and the LAPD recognizing every religion. We appreciate you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Karen Perdue.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
All items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, good morning. Our LAPD officers are faced and have contact with dangerous people on the streets daily. A convicted murderer says he will get Gascon's name tattooed on his forehead. Mr. Luis Angel Hernandez said in a jailhouse phone call his intention to get this tattoo because no gang or no gun enhancements or special circumstances will be used in the 2018 gang murder. The word is out. Quote, that's the NGGR word right there, bro. He's making historical changes for all of us, fool, unquote. Inmates are toasting each other with prison moonshine, quote, celebrating us going home on this Gascon directive, whoop, unquote. I ask, who are the fools? Whoop, whoop. Are it the victims or is it the police that have to face these criminals every day? And if they step out of line 1 inch, the hammer comes down on them. We need to retain our officers that we have spent taxpayer money on and have invested a huge amount. Drop the vaccine mandates and pay our officers a retainment bonus. Those who will stay under these circumstances absolutely deserve a bonus. Just about everyone will get this new variant, vaccinated or not. Please don't double down on stupid by firing any officers. It makes no sense at all at this time. Shifting resources may play a role in crime prevention in the future, but for now, we demand all hands on deck and all boots on the ground. 5A. Just a question, is the forensic lab funded to keep up with the processing of evidence to bring justice to sexual violence victims? It seems the victims are being left behind. Regarding the politics of policing, it has become listening to the abolitionists and anarchists. The rise in crimes make that very clear. Clearly, the soft on crime council people and their stance has resulted in unprecedented rise in violent crimes, and citizens rarely report on property crimes anymore. Please bring back constitutional policing, bring our policing back to the center. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Adam of the Smiths, followed by Hamid Khan.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
Can I speak on all of them?
Yes, 3 minutes.
And I noticed that this was the first time that you announced the next caller. So you usually do that. So I thought that was weird that you stopped that today. Good morning. First, I'll speak to Chief's report. Chief, it's hard to not notice how very proud of the heroic actions of the 4 officers who pulled the pilot from the crashed plane you are. Of course, we're all thankful that that dude wasn't killed. I wonder, though, about how much attention gets given to incidents like this versus attention to the normal day-to-day function of the LAPD. Thinking specifically about one of these officers, Christopher Aboit, who had a protest in 2020 where other non-professionalized white supremacists also showed up to assault protesters, shot an unarmed protester point blank with less lethal rubber-coated bullets, and I don't remember you ever bringing that up to this meeting. I heard you talk about GRID, Garcetti's so-called Gang Reduction and Youth Development Office, and I wondered if UCLA professor and founder of PredPol, Jeff Brantingham, is still a consultant at GRID. I bring this up because Brantingham, who both as a quote-unquote scholar and as a soulless capitalist, shows his interests are rooted in the expansion of policing and policing programs targeting Black and Brown communities in LA and beyond. He infamously made that analogy pathologizing Angelenos as being comparable to hunter-gatherers foraging to find crimes to commit. And I wonder about someone who says dumbass shit like that, what their efficacy might be within a realm of taxpayer-funded youth development. Of course, he was a co-lead researcher on the Community Safety Partnership study from UCLA Luskin that paved the way for the 2020 expansion of that program, a study funded by Rick Caruso, Weingart Foundation, and others. So just curious about that. Public comment, Mr. Tfank, I trust you and the family are well. I saw yesterday on Twitter, and for folks that don't know Twitter, it's an online social media website that millennials and Gen Z folks get their news and post polemics against everything from gluten to counterinsurgent community policing programs. But I'm sure you all know Twitter, where self-aggrandizing, attention-starved egomaniacs tweet at brands and celebrities looking for some sense of empty validation. But anyway, yeah, yesterday on Twitter, I saw a post from LAPC Fails about a letter you, Mr. Tfank, wrote to the Ethics Commission regarding Commissioner Soberoff's role as a board member at the Weingart Foundation that has donated millions to the LAPD through the LA Police Foundation over the years, and told the Ethics Commission that Soberoff wasn't involved with anything having to do with donations to LAPD from Weingart. But also in that same tweet was an email with former Weingart CEO and board member of the Mayor's Fund, Fred Ali, who made it clear that Commissioner Soberoff is instrumental in facilitating donations to the LAPD. Another email from Soberoff himself to Chief Moore asking to keep a donation confidential until he hears from Weingart directly, showing Soberoff's direct involvement. I don't think that you are actually a liar, Mr. Tfank. And I also think that the email you sent to the Ethics Commission is in direct contradiction to what the email from Fred Ali says about Mr. Soberoff's role on the Police Commission and what Soberoff told Moore himself. So just wanted to bring that up. What would the citizen's voice in police affairs nature this commission says it is?
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Hamid Khan.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Yeah, I want to start off by, first of all, something that Michael Moore said in his statement, and I quote, that LAPD is the microcosm of society. I mean, it's ironic that how, truth does come out. And yes, it is a microcosm of society because the LAPD is the enforcement arm of white supremacy. It is the enforcement arm of a system that is built on lies, manipulation, and deception. So, which brings me to today's LA Times report about the gang databases and noting, young people mostly into and manipulating all the field interview cards. But one thing that it clearly highlighted is that, most of these officers who were found guilty are now suing the LAPD and claiming and saying, which has always been going on like that that they were directed. They were clearly directed by their supervisors. They were clearly directed by the managers, which again goes back to what we have always been saying, that when people say that one bad apple, and we say, no, the whole apple cart is rotten. It's not just that, because these are institutional prerogatives. These are operational tactics that they use. So lies, manipulation, and deception is the order of the day, is the way that how LAPD functions and carries out its daily work. So, which then brings me to this whole facade of the after action report, 6-month implementation plan and the draft or whatever that's supposed to be done. Now, when you go through that 80 plus page document, and of course, just haven't seen this with fine tooth and comb, but going through that, I mean, what we have is, I'm laughing because it's, that you all think that you can make a fool of everybody, but you can't, because the mockery that is being laid out on us is that it's the same thing about de-escalation training, same thing about the use of force training, same thing about, bringing in more resources, the same thing about building relationships in the community, the same thing about rebuilding trust in the community. Now, Bonner, I don't know how old you are, but just going back to whether you were around the post, the McCone Commission that it came out of doing Watts uprising, and then the Christopher Commission that came out of Rodney King uprising, and the LAPD's own lawsuit by the DOJ, or the threat of lawsuit, which resulted in consent decree, and now going back to George Floyd, and after Mayday melee as well, it's the same language. But one thing that remains constant as well is, of course, the language that LAPD uses, but also the monies that they demand as well, which leads them to the record $3.2 billion budget, which is including their operational budget and the liabilities for pensions and everything else that they have. So there we are. And, going back to just what one of the earlier callers said, you have people coming from Oakland parachuting and representing themselves as community members. So this is just all bullshit and a facade that you.
Madam Secretary, we have 3 more hands up, and that is the end. So I'd like, let's take all 3 of them, and that will be the conclusion of the public comment.
Okay, next we have EP.
Yeah, good morning. I wanted to call in and make comments mainly about last week's meeting and the comments made by Stephen. It's not surprising at this point that Stephen doesn't know how to do his job objectively and doesn't care to be impartial. We've already highlighted all the many different ways that Steve is not only incompetent, but makes the city and the community less safe. But I will acknowledge again that Stephen should not be on the board of commissioners. And his insistence on playing the role of police recruiter, where he's supposed to be holding the police accountable, is yet another example that Steve doesn't know what the heck he's doing and makes the situation in LA substantially worse. If you want to make the streets of LA safer, then I would, Stephen, instead try and address the rising cost of rent. I would address the rising cost of gas and the quality of wages in Los Angeles, and what essentially motivates people to commit crime. That's a big motivator for that. But instead, you're trying to bring in cops from outside the city or from outside the state, because apparently nobody wants to be a police officer. And you have to ask yourself, why is that, Steve? Why don't people not trust the LAPD, and why don't they want to join the LAPD? And maybe it's because they know how corrupt it is. They know how racist it is. They know how problematic it is and how ineffective it is. And I think instead of trying failed again strategies, why don't you consider, not just Steve, but people on this board, consider things that work and have worked in other places, and I'm sure would work here in Los Angeles, such as addressing, and I keep saying this and I will continue saying this, addressing the root of the problem, what motivates people to commit crime, and start there. Provide them with resources, provide them with a high paying job, provide them with education, provide restorative justice type of methods and techniques that Stop LAPD Spying is suggesting and has been suggesting and proposing, and BLM has been suggesting and proposing through the public safety act that they have, or policy that they've suggested. Try those things, because what you're doing doesn't work. And Steve, for the love of God, and I say this with love, quit and let somebody else do the job. Goodbye.
Madam Secretary, I see that we have three more still. We had Gina Viola sign on, so let's include those three, and then we'll have a hard stop.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Elisa Avalos, followed by Matjos Kadane.
Can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
I would like to say thank you for allowing me to speak. And I would like to say to Chief Moore, it's not okay that Officer Caesar got sent away from Sunland Tahunga. It's not okay, especially with the crime rate going up. That was one of our great senior leads. And I'm glad that you brought up the officers that pulled the gentleman out of the plane. But what you forgot to say is that LAPD, Foothill Division, called Metro and asked them to stop the train. And no one seems to talk about this, not even our councilwoman, Monica Rodriguez. No one said, why did Metro not stop? What if it was a family of 4 and 2 kids in a car seat? Do you guys know how hard it is to take kids out of a car seat? Metro should also be held accountable. And I wish that our councilwoman, my councilwoman from District 7, would let you do your job correctly, Chief. It's not okay that she is not letting you do your job. And I hope that this does not happen to any of the supervisors, the police officers, or the captain, because she has not met the captain in 6 months. That is not okay. We need to have communication. And I also hope, Chief, that you relate this message to all of your senior leads and your officers, saying that if once again a council person comes and tells me to remove an officer without talking to the captain, to the community, neighborhood watch meetings, CPAD meetings, I hope that before you do this again and remove an officer, you come to the community. And I hope and pray that the councilwoman once again will let you do your job, and that you will get voted in so you can feel more comfortable to do your job. And I wish that more people can take the police community class as I did, and understand everything that an officer goes through and how quick they have to make a decision. And the reason why I feel that there's not people wanting to become cops, because of all of this bureaucracy that is going on. And one more thing, why do we have officers in LAX? LAX has their own officers, their own police station there. They know how to handle the airport. They took the classes, the training to work in the airport. So why do we have LAPD over there when we need them here? Thank you, and please, everyone stay safe, and we need to have more common ground conversations, because at the end of the day, we all want to be safe. Thank you for letting me speak, and when I win, we're gonna have more communication.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Matjos Kadane.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, Chief Moore, when Hamid Khan had called the LAPD an enforcement arm of white supremacy, you were very animate and you laughed and shook your head. And that was a stronger reaction than we saw than when another caller had this racist, mocking, Amos and Andy type narration about some caricature of Black and brown people celebrating D.A. Gascon. And I think that's pretty telling that the LAPD does uphold white supremacy in some way. And it's frankly disgusting that the rest of the commission allowed that to happen, allowed that caller to go on. I wanted to speak on the after action implementation plan update on the agenda, which is already pretty gaslighty, because if we talk about the action in question, it was a mass uprising kind of condemning the LAPD and policing and demanding a defunding, the response to which was an increase in funding, an increase in surveillance and technology implementation used to brutalize Angelenos. And a part of this update kind of cites oversight as being a component that'll help keep people safe. But oversight is something that's existed as a reform on technology for a few years now. We've seen oversight on body worn video, oversight on license plate readers. This hasn't stopped the LAPD from abusing these things or these policies that they've put in place that are a sham. These oversights, these reforms are going to continually be circumnavigated, because regardless of what protections you put in place, these technologies aren't here to protect us or to keep us safe. They're actually here to do harm. The intent is for the LAPD to more easily do harm. And so when we look at something like the technology adoption and use policy on this after action report, this is really just a new take on community control over police surveillance, something made by the ACLU that they've gone on to condemn. And one of the people involved in writing this policy, Brian Hofer, of the Oakland Privacy Advisory Commission in California, is pretty familiar with the fact that this just doesn't work. He's based over in Oakland, and he's actually had to sue the Oakland Police Department in order to comply with these oversight conditions. So it's just a sham. It's an absolute joke to think that this thing can be reformed or overseen. We want it gone. Lastly, on the crime data that Chief Moore kind of reported at the top, this data is ridiculous. It could be manipulated to fit whatever narrative LAPD wants to push. If it serves the LAPD's agenda of securing resources to fearmonger, then they're going to fearmonger. They're going to manufacture a 4-year average. If the LAPD wants to show that or give the impression that they're doing their job.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Gina Viola.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
Chief's report and public comment, please.
Okay, 2 minutes.
So, Mr. Soboroff, you definitely displayed today that you very easily cherry pick who gets to speak at public comment. There are folks waiting in the queue whose hands went up long before mine did. But as soon as you saw my hand go up, you made a change to how you were going to take public comment, which means it's
Patently
arbitrary
untrue,
week
but
after
go
week.
ahead.
You can't interrupt me, sir.
Yeah,
One of my big concerns about this sham of an oversight body is that you report things week after week without looking at any data for things. Do any of you even know what the National Crime Victimization Survey is? Do you? You talk about victims' rights all the time. This is a survey that's done by the Federal Bureau of Justice Statistics, and it shows that violent crime is historically low. And contrary to the FBI's uniform crime reports, that it decreased in 2020. Experts regard this data as more accurate because it's more comprehensive. Yet I've never heard it mentioned in this room, in this setting, because all that you do is cover for the LAPD week after week. Why does Chief Moore get to speak ad nauseum at what is supposed to be an oversight body for the LAPD? Who you should be hearing from is the public. And you need to do that by changing the date and time of these meetings to make them more accessible to the public. Tuesday morning is the same time the city council meets, supervisors meets, and often LAUSD meets. And I think you know that. It's by design. You are no way, shape, or form the citizen's voice in policing affairs. You are the policing's voice in policing affairs. You need to bring these meetings back in person. It is just outrageous that how long the kids have been in school with masks off and you still claim COVID is the reason we're not meeting in person. We know it's because we build power in that room.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to item number 4, the consent agenda. 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. Do any commissioners?
Mr. President, excuse me, Mr. President, you have to
Yes.
take item number 3.
You're right. 3 is before 4. Item number 3. Whoops.
And on this item, sir, it would be advisable to read the entire item, then at the conclusion of that, have the board have a motion and then vote on that item.
Okay. We've recommended for board action that we find the following: why on February 22nd, 2022, the governor issued a proclamation rescinding various COVID-related provisions. The COVID-19 state of emergency declared by the governor on March 4th is still active and remains in effect. The continued state of emergency and the persistence of the highly contagious COVID variants in Los Angeles County, as reported by the CDC COVID-19 tracker, directly impact the ability of the board members to meet safely and in person. Additionally, on March 1st of this year, the City Council found that the state of emergency directly impacts the ability of all City Brown Act bodies to meet safely and in person. In accordance with AB 361, this Brown Act body has reconsidered the circumstances of the state of emergency, and that the state of emergency continues to present imminent risks to the health and safety of attendees and continues to directly impact the ability of board members to meet safely in person. I will move that. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Kalachi, yeah?
Yes, aye.
Okay, thanks. Okay, let's go to item number 4, the consent agenda items. There are 4 items. Commissioners have any comments or questions on any of the 4 items? Then I will move consent agenda items 4A, B, C, and D. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand.
Aye.
Good.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, those are approved. Let's go to item number 5, the regular agenda items. We have first, we have a verbal presentation and discussion by the representatives of Peace Over Violence regarding Denim Day in honor of Sexual Violence Awareness Month. Who's handling that presentation?
Mr. President, it'd be Miss Yvette Lozano from Peace Over Violence, who just came up on the screen.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, commissioners, members, and LA City constituents. Thank you so much for inviting us. My name is Yvette Lozano. I am with Peace Over Violence. I'm the Chief Program and Operations Officer, and I am here briefly to talk about Denim Day during this month of April, which is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And a brief presentation, if I could just borrow some of your time. And let me begin this presentation. So first, let me thank you so much again for inviting us. I'm actually here to speak about sexual violence and Denim Day. Peace Over Violence has been, bringing this campaign to awareness in the city of Los Angeles. It started in the city of Los Angeles, and now 23 years later has grown to be a national campaign to bring awareness on these issues of sexual abuse and sexual assault in our communities. This actually started several years ago in 1992, when an 18-year-old young woman was raped by her 45-year-old driving instructor back in Italy. The person, she reported it, the person was arrested and convicted, and the person that was arrested, he appealed the case, and then the case was then overturned by the Italian Supreme Court. The reasoning for the case being overturned was because the survivor at the time just said that she was wearing tight jeans and therefore cannot have been raped. And so, number one, we know that that's a victim blaming statement, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So the women in the Italian parliament protested this decision by wearing jeans on the steps of the Supreme Court. And obviously through media, this was witnessed in California. Our own California State Assembly members and Senate members joined in solidarity to protest that decision. And our executive director, Patty Giggins, then has created the campaign to really bring awareness on this issue, to really understand the impact that sexual violence has in our communities and how we could support survivors. Really what it comes down to is we take the entire month of April, and because Peace Over Violence is one of the rape crisis centers, one of the 8 rape crisis centers in LA County, we teach on these issues and bring awareness on these issues 365 days a year, not just today, not just in April, but we want to make sure that people understand, community members understand the impact and what sexual violence is, right? We understand that it is a type of assault. It is forced, it's used by coercion, it's used by manipulation. Sexual assault includes sexual harassment, which could happen in our workplaces, in our streets, street harassment. It could happen in any type of environment. It also, what it comes down to is really understanding what that means. It's not just a form of assault where you're physically attacked, but it also includes different types of attacks, such as rape, sodomy, sexual acts, harassment, unwanted touching. And really, we are trying to encourage those survivors who sometimes are hesitant to report because it's not something that could easily be reported because of the fact that sometimes there's fear, there's intimidation, obviously shame, and it impacts survivors very much. So what it comes down to is we want to take the opportunity during the month of April to really bring more awareness, to talk about what consent means. What is consent? We are at our high schools teaching these issues, which is very important to our youth and our young community members, is that consent is willing, it's a willing participation, right? It's very specific. It's an enthusiastic consent. It is informed, it is a mutual agreement, it is ongoing. It's not just one time that you get permission or the yes. It is equal power and understanding that at any time consent can't be withdrawn, even if it was given at one time. Consent is a negotiation. Consent happens without pressure or manipulation because we know coercion is a part of this in sexual violence. Consent is not persisting. It's when someone says no, either verbally or non-verbally, it's no. So we want to make sure that when someone says yes, that they want to have sexual intercourse, or that it doesn't mean that they have consent all the time, at any time, right? So this is an ongoing conversation that it's sometimes that we know that in sexual violence, manipulation, coercive control is part of this. Sexual abuse is power and control, just like domestic violence. So we want to be able to not blame victims. An example was that statement that the victim wore jeans and therefore could not have been raped is a victim blaming statement. Victim blaming sometimes creates barriers for survivors to report to police or to seek services. And we know that survivors have the option not to report and to immediately be connected to an advocacy or rape crisis center for support. We want to dismantle the issue of rape culture, that it is not something that we are comfortable speaking on these issues, but sometimes we tend to normalize these issues, and that we want to make sure that if this is an issue that comes up, we're able to address it appropriately and educate ourselves, and also dismantle maybe the rape jokes that occur in our community, in our conversations. So what is the purpose of Denim Day? Again, it's a sexual violence campaign. We want to make sure that we are supporting survivors who do decide to report or not report. We want to educate our allies, and I thank you all for inviting me, because if you have your constituents here of the LA City This is information that we're passing on. We want to dismantle the misconceptions and attitudes that are out there regarding sexual violence. We want to reframe the conversation about sexual abuse and rape culture, and we want to influence policy with businesses and our response and our support. We know that we have been working closely with LAPD in responding to our SART centers. During COVID, we had a low reporting. We know that also this issue is also not as reportable as it should be. Again, so since we started reopening in our communities, we have seen an increase in our hotline calls and in our SART response with our law enforcement partners to support survivors at the local SART centers. So on April 27th, we ask all of you to wear jeans with a purpose. We will be hosting a press conference in City Hall and following a rally to support and inform the community on these issues so that we could disrupt the rape culture that consistently continues to happen within our communities. We want to educate and mobilize on these issues. We want to break the silence. And if we break this silence, we know that we could hear those voices of those survivors who have unfortunately experienced these traumatic issues. We want to work on policy. We want to highlight the different impacted groups in our communities that are affected by sexual abuse. And we want to also acknowledge that there is never an excuse and never an invitation to rape. And that rape does not just happen to one specific group, it happens to any person. It could happen to any person, any community member, whether it be women, our spouse, queer individuals, men, those who are incarcerated, elderly, our military personnel, sex workers, and people with disabilities and other populations. So I invite you to join us on April 27th for Denim Day in LA and USA. We have our website that you could upload materials, information. And I also want to encourage anyone in the community that if you have been a survivor, if you are a survivor of sexual assault or know someone and needs additional support, these are our 24-hour hotlines. You could reach us. It's non-judgmental, confidential. We have trained advocates on the hotline that could provide support and resources. And any victim has the right to have an advocate with them at the time of reporting. And we are there to support you and believe you and guide you through the process. And I want to thank, again, I want to thank the commission for inviting me. And I also want to acknowledge the partnership with LAPD through our sexual assault and DART response teams that we've been working with for many years. And our officers are also take part in provide so that we could provide trauma-informed response to survivors in the community.
Ms. Lozano, can you go back 2 slides and put that slide back up again? I want to photograph it and put it out on social media.
Let me go ahead and do that for you.
It was the one before the phone numbers.
Oh, absolutely. Here we go.
No, the one before that.
There you go. So we have our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And if you are wanting to upload or get materials and like the background I have right now, you can look at denimday.org or visit our website.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lozano. It's a really well done presentation, incredibly important and timely right now. Thank you. Do we have any questions from the commissioners, and I'd love to hear comments from the chief as well.
I'll go ahead.
Calanche.
Yes. Ms. Lozano, I just want to thank you for all your work. I have friends and colleagues that have gone through the volunteer training, and it's a big commitment. And it's very thorough, and just want to thank you because you're not just through your staff, but through all the volunteers that you recruit across the city to be available for those that are experiencing domestic violence. But I just want to reiterate Commissioner Soborov's gratitude for the work that you do. And I hope that everyone participates and that becomes more aware of the challenges that women face at home and in other situations. Just thank you for your work.
Thank you so much. We cannot do the work without our community members and our volunteers. We appreciate it.
Commissioner Bonner.
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to Ms. Lozano for joining the conversation today. I had a couple of questions that may go beyond the Denim Day, which I understand to be a subset, an important subset of the broader work you do on sexual violence and the like. The first question is, can you comment generally on what is known about the sexual violence problem across, race, gender, economic status? Sometimes it's thought of, and some of the images we see sometimes are directed to communities of color, which are also very important. But I believe this is a broader problem. So I just wanted you to comment first on what you see in terms of how pervasive the issues are.
I'm sorry, I was having a time unclicking from my mute. Yes, this actually, we know that in sexual violence impacts pretty much any population. We know that it's just not an issue that it impacts women, and we have male survivors who are sexually abused and assaulted, molested, children. It becomes a barrier when our community is not aware of the resources and the support and the rights that they have as victims and reporting. So we know that a lot of times we, within peace over violence, and I could only speak for peace over violence, we serve about 40% of monolingual, 30% of monolingual Spanish undocumented survivors. And this could sometimes be barriers for survivors not knowing their rights and not understanding the concept behind what sexual violence is. So I'm not sure if I'm addressing your question, but this issue is something that impacts pretty much everyone in the community, and it's very important, especially our youth, our high schoolers. We're in the high schools providing this education to our young ones and really informing them on these issues of consent and providing the support that they may have already experienced, unfortunately. And then there's also the connection of sexual violence and sex trafficking within our community as well, with our Black and Brown community members as well. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question appropriately.
No, absolutely. I think you confirmed at least what I understand to be the case, which is it is an issue that transcends lots of different strata of society. So I appreciate that. I wanted to also ask about, you referenced the issue of reporting, these incidents. And I've seen some information over the last, several months in particular. I often comment on this issue of reported versus unreported crime. And I've seen some information that suggests that, an overwhelming majority of crime occurs in the home. People are afraid of crime on the streets, but a lot of, they've seen some information that up to 40% of crime is crime that occurs in the home. Some of that is assault, somebody grabs your arm, somebody smacks a kid, a wife, a spouse, whatever that is. And some people may or may not even know they are crimes. But what does that picture look like in this context of sexual violence, domestic violence, and so on, in terms of the prevalence of reporting? Is it similar in nature that it's something that is you would surmise the majority of these or a large amount of them go unreported, or is there any higher degree of reporting in this context?
No, unfortunately, sexual violence along with domestic violence continues to be, in my opinion, underreported. It's an issue that sometimes it's, I can't really, I've been doing this for 21 years now. I don't understand why someone, will not report. And I do understand why someone will report. There sometimes in sexual assault, survivors, it feels very intimate, very private. The type of questioning sometimes that is asked. This is the purpose that the SART teams were created. The SART teams were created to create a one-team response so that survivors do not have to retell their story over and over to police, to a nurse, to a medical professional. So that's a functioning system, our SART response team. They have an advocate like myself that is there to guide them, inform them, and explain their rights. And yeah, this is an issue that happens in the home. Children of during COVID, we noticed that sexual abuse of children increased during the last 2 years. Although, because facilities, businesses were closed down, we've seen a decline in sexual reporting of sexual assaults in our hotlines. And I'm not sure for police, that could be the same. Chief Moore could speak to that. But now that we're back again opening, we're seeing a steady increase back again. And I would call it kind of the normal of victims reporting or calling our hotline. So for survivors who do not wish to report for whatever reason, and they have the right to do that, they could get a SART exam without cooperating with police. And they could also get support from a hotline without us having to mandate to call police. And so they could continue their services. So it's important for survivors to understand what options and what resources are out there for them so that they could get the help, maybe there's connection, the resources they need to start their healing after such a traumatic incident of violence.
Very, very helpful. Thank you. I did have two additional questions quickly. One is on the question of what is known, about the perpetrators of this kind of violence. So my assumption, based on what you described earlier about that this is a problem that transcends lots of different elements of society, I also then assume that many of the perpetrators are people who would normally be thought of as otherwise law-abiding citizens. So in other words, when I'm trying to understand it, it may be somebody who exacts this sort of violence and then goes out to teach a class or goes out to work, so to speak, as opposed to someone who's on the streets and thought of as a street criminal, so to speak. So could you speak a little bit to that part of it in terms of what you see? And I mean, you've seen a lot of these reports and hear a lot of stories. Are the stories, typically involving, or is that common to hear stories involving people who are otherwise thought of as law-abiding citizens?
Right, absolutely. A person that causes harm or of sexual violence is usually 80% of the time is someone that the victim knows, an acquaintance, a family member, a friend, someone they met online. They had some kind of conversation connection. And it's your everyday person, just like a survivor could be your any person, right? An elderly, a young woman, a teenager, sexual abuse suspects could be anyone as well. So it's very important that we are aware of who can perpetrate these type of crimes so that we could prevent them. And many times, an example of underreported, it's an intimate partner that could, be sexually abusing their spouse or their boyfriend or girlfriend or partner in that relationship. And it becomes another barrier for the victim to report because obviously there's, love or some connection or trauma bonding that occurs. And it's difficult for that survivor to report their partner. So there's all people, the people that cause harm could be just anyone.
Well, just my last question relates that we were talking a minute ago about the perpetrators. I
think the connection's
wanted to go back to the victim side of the equation. And one of the things, at least I personally had more, you can hear me? You said I'm frozen? I don't know.
You're good.
I'm okay. All right. It says I got a message that says I'm unstable. So, or at least my internet connection is, but it probably relates to both of us. But any event, I was going back to the victim side of the equation. And one of the things I at least have been more aware of in the last couple of years is this idea. Sometimes you hear when somebody comes forward, say after the, long after the fact, And initially you would hear people say, hey, how could this really be true? You graduated from college, you went off and you did this other stuff. Or how could this be true? You didn't really, act like, we didn't see the signs of trauma. And can you speak to that a little bit in terms of, and the point is that one thing I learned is that many people carry unresolved trauma for many, many years and may or may not ever report a crime, even if they continue to be impacted by it. But that's what I just wanted to get a sense also is you mentioned a number of initiatives and things that are in place to help people to make that reporting easier, to help them not have to repeat it over and over again, things of that nature. And with all of that in terms of the state of affairs today, are you finding people still even that come forward after the fact and report things, or are you still focused on and engaging primarily with people who are recent victims of a crime?
We engage with all survivors. It could be a acute situation where it just happened last night, 2 hours ago. I could get a call and respond now. And I could get a call on a hotline that from a survivor who is 45 years old and is finally just reporting for the first time because they're dealing with their unresolved trauma. And so it is not easy to come forward and talk about this issue. It is very difficult for survivors to disclose, to share what happened. Again, it goes back to those victim blaming statements, rape culture, how society and community responds to survivors, our reaction. If you think about it, if you have someone ever disclose to you, the first thing, normally what we would ask is, why were you there? Why were you wearing that? Rather than, why did that person commit such act? Why did that person assault you? So it is really important to know that survivors it's hard. They cannot heal from one day to the other. Every survivor is different. Every survivor will react and respond differently. Every survivor will experience different symptoms or reactions to their own trauma. And then there's also triggers. Those triggers, if you hear something on the news and you're trying to resolve that issue you went through, a trigger, even this conversation could potentially trigger one of any of the constituents listening right now. And that's why I encourage a hotline. I encourage them to seek support, non-judgmental, and someone that could advocate and guide them through the process. And if it's reporting or not reporting, we offer counseling, free of services, and advocacy with police, the court system accompaniments, anything that they need, we're there to support them. And that's why these resources and agencies are very important that we have in our community. So every reaction, every response is different for single survivors. And if someone doesn't report right away, it is okay. It is when they're ready.
Well, thank you very much again. And on that last point in particular, is something, at least as I say, it's resonated with me and I think is important for people to understand, is that you can't judge someone by how they react to a situation, and you can't choose to believe them or not believe them based on how you think a victim should look or react. So that's an important point, I think, for everyone to remember. So thank you again for coming today, and appreciate the message that you're continuing to get out as broadly as possible. Thank you.
Chief Moore.
Thank you, Commissioners. First of all, let me thank Ms. Lozano for being here today and for Peace Over Violence. Thank God for Patty Gibbons for bringing this concept and promoting it over the decades. And certainly for the Los Angeles Police Department, we value and cherish the partnership we have with Peace Over Violence, as we do with every advocate organization and every supportive services, whether it's family justice centers that we see in the Valley, here on the downtown area, or it's a Stewart House or Santa Monica Rape Treatment Center. All of you weigh in every day in support of victims and survivors of these terrible attacks, the walking homicides that they can sometimes be described as. These last few years have been very trying and troublesome on so many different levels. But from law enforcement, we are particularly concerned about what Commissioner Bonner questioned about, which is the level of reporting of this crime and how prevalent is the underreporting, which we know historically by a number of academic studies that sexual violence is significantly underreported for a number of issues that Ms. Lozano, you referenced a series of them.
over a 2-year period, sexual assaults in Los Angeles are reportedly down 24%. And I don't believe that. Over these last 2 years and our efforts with Peace Over Violence and other advocacy groups to have ongoing and frequent conversations about what services can exist, what housing resources are available, what means of which in a court system that was largely disabled because of impacts of pandemic trials that should have occurred. Just this past Sunday, I had the benefit of meeting with Ms. Barbanal and walking through the Stewart House yet again and being reminded of cases that are years old and are yet to go to trial, and the ongoing trauma that is posing to these survivors of this violence, many times children, but of again, all walks of life and all corners of our society. So we just join with you in your continued advocacy, your continued support, the education and awareness, particularly the education and awareness of men's responsibility, of young men's responsibility, of children's responsibilities as to what consent means and what it looks like and what it must and always contain as elements. And again, this April is yet another opportunity to see the Denim Day. I look forward to, as a department, we've authorized that as a uniform of the day, if you will. But more than that symbolism is our continued work together to stop this terrible issue in our society that is so prevalent. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you again very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Okay, you're welcome. You too. Okay, let's go to agenda item 5B, which is our last item of the day. There is no closed session today, so we'll do 5B and then adjourn. A presentation is coming from whom? Or are we going right to questions? I guess to Assistant Chief Choi. Morning, sir.
Good morning. I just want to make sure we're pulling up all the working group leads real quick.
Okay, good. You've got
started.
You got Deputy Chief Reyna and Elizabeth Rhodes.
Okay, I think.
Morning, everyone.
Tingarides, and then.
Oh, okay. I don't see her.
Commander Goddard should be here for technology.
Okay, great.
Chief, I don't see Goddard logged on. I'll call his office. Give me 1 second.
Okay. You know what, I can just get us started.
Yeah, go ahead.
Really, and then he can log on as we start. So good morning, everybody. Good morning, Chief. Good morning, Inspector General Smith and City Attorney De La Guerra and Mr. T. Fink. So I just want to start first by introducing our working group leads. If you remember, we had 4 working groups in developing this plan. So Director Elizabeth Rhodes, she's in charge of our policy development and legal considerations working group. And then Deputy Chief Amada Tingarides, she ran our community relations and trust building working group. And then Deputy Chief Mark Reyna, who led our training working group. And then Commander Randy Goddard, when he arrives, he was leading our technology and equipment working group. So what I'm going to do today, obviously you guys, you've seen the documents. There's a lot of items there. I'm not going to go over everything, but I want to just provide a brief overview of the 6-month update of this plan, and kind of let you know, or give you guys a status of where we're at. But before I do that, I just want to talk about what went into it as kind of a refresher. As you recall, we had 3 after action reports. There was a total of 106 recommendations that came out of those 3 after action reports. We consolidated or grouped all those into 32 overall recommendations. And then we also had the Police Commission's Advisory Committee report, which had, at the end of the day, when we looked at everything that was actionable, things that we needed to do, came out to 291 separate actions or recommendations. And all of those were incorporated into this report as well. So in the 4 working groups and we also had a advisory after action advisory committee that was developed. In the working groups and in that committee, we had a police commissioner involved in each of those groups. we had community members, we had subject matter experts, and we had a department staff officer equivalent involved in these working groups and the advisory committee. What you have today are 8 spreadsheets. Essentially, you have 2 spreadsheets for each of the 4 working groups. One is for the after action recommendations and one is for the advisory committee recommendations. And also to keep our status updates more consistent, we refine the statuses to 5 areas. They can either be reported as complete, which means the action has been taken as a result of the recommendation and no further action is required. It could be ongoing, meaning action has been taken as a result of the recommendation, but requires continuing effort to fulfill the recommendations. For example, ongoing training or regular policy reviews or a continuation of evaluating our hiring practices. And then you have a current practice status, which is a recommendation that's been addressed through existing practice and is currently in place. You have in progress, which is the department is working towards adopting the recommendation. However, there's more work to be done on the recommendation. And then you have our pending items, which means we need funding to completely adopt the recommendation. And just so this group knows, those amounts were asked for in whole in this next coming fiscal year's budget. So the overall progress of the implementation plan is, we'll start with the after action report recommendations. These are 32 recommendations. We have 25% or 8 of the recommendations that are complete. We have 31% or 10 that are ongoing. We have 3% or 1 that we consider in progress. And we have 41% or 13 that are pending or waiting for funding to completely or to complete. And then going to the recommendations for the advisory committee report, again, 291 recommendations, 5% or 16 are considered complete. 28% or 80 of the recommendations are ongoing. 51% or 149 of these recommendations are considered current practice. And 16% or 46 of these items are considered in progress. So I want to just talk about a couple notable recommendations that we and the status of them. I'm not going to go over all of them. And then I'd just like to open it up to the group for questions since we have all the leads here. And I think that would be the best way to approach this. One notable event.
Chief, I want to ask you just an overriding question. So as you make the presentation, we're 6 months in, but and there's a lot been done and a lot to do. But how are we today and during this process better equipped or different than we were before this process started? In the case of an event, these events don't happen when we want them to. They could happen anytime. So I'm not saying specifically, but just in a broader context, as this evolves, how are we better equipped? How is Los Angeles safer? How do we have a different outcome, even if it happens tomorrow?
Well, I think to that question specifically, many of the recommendations surrounded or involved are mobile field force tactics, our less lethal munitions, how we train or how we didn't train repeatedly for these type of incidents. I can tell you that our mobile field force training, one of those recommendations, the way in which we train or how we train has been revamped, it's been rewritten, and that training has been ongoing. Now, I know in these after action plan, we asked for some funding to make these positions to have ongoing training permanent. And that's why some of these recommendations regarding mobile field force you'll see as pending. However, that hasn't stopped us to redoing the curriculum and providing the new training if an incident were to occur. Additionally, with our incident command systems and the way our DOC operates and communicating and command and control these incidents, that was a concern. We've provided command officers training through the DOC. In what their roles and responsibilities are if these events occur. We utilize this platform during the Super Bowl and things went well. So I think we're in a much better place and we're refreshed with our previous training and our new training, and we're capable and ready to handle any incident that occurs at this point. We've also taken beanbags off the line because we've been challenged with some of the distances that they're approved for, effective at. And so we're using other less lethal tools to accomplish the same missions. And so I think we're ready to answer that specific question. All right. So I'm just going to hit on a couple notable recommendations on each working group and then open it up to questions. I see Deputy Chief John McMahon has joined us, who is leading the Technology and Equipment Working Group.
Yeah, Chief, thank you. Great segue. Commissioner Soboroff, an additional piece to answer your question in regards to technology, as this effort has given the department an opportunity to engage software developers in the development of what we believe will be an example for law enforcement nationwide. We are on the verge of creating the type of capability that will allow us to leverage GPS technology in the police vehicles, draw a virtual map, if you will, and then when police resources cross that virtual map, we will automatically record the arrival of that resource. Oftentimes through our paper processes, we were not always capturing every resource. When they entered a scene or sometimes exited a scene, we're able to document the amount of time that's spent within these different large-scale events. The use of this technology will not only give department incident commanders the ability to automatically track in real time that the resources are there, but where exactly they're at, but also on the back end, it will put us in a much better position to recap funds from the federal government from those times when we get reimbursement. So if anything, this, from a technology standpoint, this effort has given us an opportunity to, in the end, walk away with a piece of technology that we would not have otherwise had in the short term that will put us in a much better emergency management position moving forward.
Thank you, Chief McMahon. So I'm just going to go through a couple recommendations and then we can talk to the working group leads. So for the Community Relations and Trust Building Working Group, one of the notable recommendations was to develop a Community Engagement Best Practices Committee, which is going to be led by the Director of the Office of Operations and co-chaired by the Chief at Community Safety Partnership Bureau. That has made significant progress. It's still considered pending because we're asking for personnel to have a full-time position to move this forward. This was also requested in the budget, but to date, there's been an advertisement out on our local area network for those interested in being part of this committee to submit their names. Chief Tingrides and Chief Marino have met and had their first meeting on April 6th in developing this committee. So there's been significant progress there. There's a recommendation from the Police Commission Advisory Committee that says, continue to facilitate officers meeting the community, including children and teenagers at public events to better understand cultures, encourage transparency, and help build trust. This recommendation is ongoing as a status, but our public engagement section, they've been out there continuing to encourage department employees to recruit our city's youth to participate in department youth programs. In the last 6 months, officers positively engaged with youth from around the city, and it resulted in the recruitment of 306 youth participants in this upcoming cadet academy. Moving on to the Policy Development and Legal Considerations Working Group. Out of the after action recommendations, item number 3 was revise the field jail manual. That status is ongoing. However, Custody Services Division was able to revise the manual and update it and address many of the concerns that came up out of the mass arrests and the field jails. And that's all been incorporated and updated within this manual. It's at the Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy for final review and should be published in the near future. Additionally, pre-text stops was a recommendation that came out of the Police Commission's Advisory Committee. And I think we all know that recommendation is complete. There was a policy, a special order number 3 that was published dated March 9th, 2022 that completely addressed pretextual stops. Another component for the same working group from the advisory committee was to expand SMART teams, right? So currently we have 12 co-response units per day. There has been a budget request for the 2022-23 fiscal year to increase this deployment to 21 smart units per day. And there was also a Chief of Police notice dated January 14th, 2021 on the implementation of the mental evaluation units SMART team model, co-response model that addressed this recommendation as well to increase the SMART teams. Regarding the training working group, there was a recommendation. Again, I talked about this briefly. The mobile field force training and field jail training. Again, the status of this recommendation is pending, meaning we need personnel or funding to complete this, but it hasn't stopped us from moving forward with the training our officers in mobile field force, training our detectives and our jailers in our field jail manual revision. So that is continuing to move forward. Again, the reason for the funding to get permanent positions is so we can cycle through this every 2 years and everyone continues to get trained. It's not one time and done, and that way we'll always be up to speed on the most current training in these areas. For the training working group, one of the advisory committee recommendations was to develop a training bulletin that provides guidance on interactions with people with disabilities. That status is complete. All relevant bulletins were updated in 20 and 21. They include contacts with the public, parts 1 and 2, procedural justice training bulletins, developmental disabilities, interacting with the deaf and deafblind or hard of hearing, and elder and dependent adult abuse. And then regarding technology and equipment, Chief Ahmad touched on it already, the technology that's being developed to facilitate our operations in the field. However, I just want to talk about one of the advisory committee recommendations, number 4. In acquiring technologies and equipment, the recommendation was for the department to develop specific guidelines for the adoption of new and existing technologies. That status is ongoing, but Information Technology Bureau is working closely with Brian Hoffer from Secure Justice to develop a community police advisory board for technology that will review new technology for the department and make recommendations to the police commission for approval. And this timeline is going to take about 8 to 12 months. So that, again, that just touches on a few of the recommendations and the progress in those. Again, there's 180, 200 pages of recommendations, so I won't go into those. But if you have anything specific, I have the working groups here to address any questions you may have.
Okay, well, let me start. Chief, and I think you can probably answer this or call on whomever to answer it. I understand bulletins have been updated, manuals updated, and then we get training has commenced and made progress. Can you define training is on this kind of on these things that has happened so quickly and are so fluid? Does it mean in the field training? Does it mean we've done role playing? Is it just in the classroom? Are we looking at other events, because these events have continued to happen since the events in Los Angeles, and are they receiving critique? What is that training experience of the officer in relation to just getting a bulletin updated or a manual updated from a practical perspective?
I can answer that if you let me, and then Chief Rannick could jump in on the.
Chief, are you going to let him, Chief?
Okay, so this is both. Not only have the update bulletins been updated in writing in our manuals, but actual hands-on and scenario-based training has occurred. One thing I didn't mention regarding our less lethal, our 40 millimeter, it used to be once you shoot it out of the academy or whatever, when you go to that training, there is no recertification or retraining. That now has been incorporated into our annual shotgun qualification. So an officer that's certified or qualified in the 40 millimeter will touch and use that at least once a year. But it's not just about the tactic of how to get on a line and move a crowd, but part of that, a lot of this training is command and control. How do the supervisors address what they're going to do, critical decision making, force mitigation, all those things were incorporated into this training, and how does our actions impact the community in that crowd, and really to assess the crowd and what is the threat. So so it's practical application, scenario based, as well as documented on paper and training bulletins, things like that.
Chief, do you want to add to that, or did you cover it all?
So when it comes to, let's say, a paper document, a training bulletin that goes out through our learning management system, and everyone has to acknowledge that and look at that and read those things. And then those documents are incorporated into our hands-on training. So for example, the mobile field force training Chief Choi alluded to, we started this way back. We discussed this plenty of times in police commission. Right now, we're at 6,888 personnel that were trained in mobile field force. In our command and control, 8,300 personnel were trained in command and control. And that's the crux of that training. It's hands-on, it's classroom. They talk about bulletins, they talk about updates and laws, updates and policies, and then they go out and they do the practical application, the scenario-based training physically in the training scenarios with instructors there to go through it. So you can see that thousands of personnel have already been through that training. In addition, like Chief Choi talked about, our recertification process, we have it infused already in our annual shotgun where they go through the 40 millimeter, but we're also going to have, we talked about the 2-year research cycle where everyone who carries a less lethal has to be recertified in that. A lot of that, like Chief Choi talked about, some of that is pending funding, because we obviously, as you're recertifying personnel continuously, it's going to take money to buy those rounds for the less lethal apparatus. So some of that is pending the funding. And then there's a 2-year cycle for that. There's also the 2-year cycle we'd like to do for the mobile field force. We are continuing that. There is a budget item that's pending to have a full-time cadre, instead of loaning people in and pulling them from patrol or metropolitan division, the experts to teach that, to have a full-time cadre that is continuously teaching that mobile field force. So we don't just do it one time and then not for years to come. So everyone will be cycled through every 2 years to get the command and control and the mobile field force training, and that 2-year recertification, for the less lethal, regardless if you're part of a mobile field force or you're in, let's say, patrol operations.
Okay, so on like item number 23 is training regarding the really important stuff of conflict resolution, de-escalation before things get out of hand. Again, you're saying that in addition to the classroom portion, that there are practical in the field, role-playing, hands-on experiences with these in this area.
That's correct. And when it comes to things like de-escalation, all of that has been infused into all of our use of force courses. So regardless if it's a mobile field force, if it's a less lethal, our new course that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, which is our critical thinking and force options when dealing with suicidal subjects or people that are armed with weapons other than firearms. It's talked about in there, not only in the classroom, but also in that practical application where they're being assessed as they're put in these scenarios to work their de-escalation techniques and tactics before utilizing any type of force.
Chief Moore, do you have anything to add to this? And I have just one more question.
Well, I'm proud of the work of Chief Choi, Chief Reyna, Dr. Pennell, Director Rhodes, Chief Tingrides, all of them that have provided training in various formats. So when you said, when you ask how has this been delivered, for instance, on pretext stops, Ms. Rhodes and Commander Lurie have visited countless roll calls and supervisor meetings and command officer meetings on the initial rollout. We've also done some videos and some other outreach and engagement. And as you look at each of these subjects, they vary. But what's really critically important is that the mayor's budget should be released tomorrow. And in it, this commission approved a series of requests of further investing in training, because while it sounds like much has been done, it's been a combination of knitting together existing resources, harvesting resources from field assignments, from uniform patrols and others in order to accomplish this. And we really need, as a department organizationally, one of the overarching findings of all of the 3 action after reports is that this organization historically has not structurally supported our in-service training. That we've robbed Peter to pay Paul, we've harvested resources in order to cover an evolving set of training needs for contemporary policing. And we are at, I believe, an important juncture as we move forward, that while we are giving you a 6-month report, and it demonstrates a lot of work on every one of these leaders that are here, but by no means are we at the finish line. When you have, when you've received a training session, that's it. You've received one training session. And I believe that perishable skills and the ability to do this work is like a gas tank. You burn it up as you drive, and you go back and you got to fill the tank up and refresh and renew the expectations, the evolution of our training and how we go about policing in a number of different arenas. And so it's really critical that, again, we've marshaled resources to meet the moment right now on an immediate basis. To your point, Commissioner Sobroff, what happens if the flag goes up tomorrow? What happens with some of the Americas? What happened with the potential of happening with the NFL week and the Super Bowl game? So we had to muster and move and mobilize in order to correct for some of the deficiencies and shortfalls we had, but we are by no means there. We've got much more work to do in a persistent fashion going forward, and I'm hopeful and believe, and in fact, I know that Mayor Garcetti has been supportive of those findings and also our efforts to marshal additional resources to do this in a lasting way so that we do not repeat the failures that we've seen, the shortfalls that we've seen, from one decade to the next.
Great. Okay, my last question, then we'll go to the other commissioners, Commissioner Kalanche next. But this is to Deputy Chief Tingarides. Hi, welcome. Thanks for being here. It said that the first meeting of the Community Engagement Best Practices Committee took place a couple weeks ago, I guess. And also that we have a series of ongoing events, meetings and things like that. First, I was going to ask you how they go, but I'm sure they went fine. But what surprises were there too? I mean, here's somebody like you that's seasoned, nationally known for understanding these issues. Do you learn anything new from these? Has anything come to your mind that and any takeaways from you, or just validations?
Hi, Commissioner. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us. I first want to acknowledge Commissioner Kalanche. She is also part of the Community Relations and Best Practices Committee, and she has been working really hard to align the efforts that we have going on with CSPB citywide through the senior lead officers. And so our first official meeting did occur on the 6th of April, and we made the decision to combine the work that Commissioner Kalanche was doing with the Office of Operations alongside CSPB. And I think one of the first things that we learned and what we're going to push forward with is coming up with a mission statement and definition of what community engagement is. And so there's a Senior Lead Officer Summit tomorrow, in which Commissioner Kalanche, alongside the Office of Operations and CSPB, will meet with all senior lead officers citywide to ask just that question. And we have no doubt that we will find there will be different answers depending on the areas that these senior lead officers work in. But we're going to use that Senior Lead Officer Summit to get the voice of the officers and the work that we're doing, and then bring that information back to our Best Practices Committee to create a strategic plan and mission statement centered around what community engagement is, and then ensuring that we align what that mission statement is across all of our community engagement efforts within the department. Commissioner Kalanche, I don't want to speak out of turn if you want to add to that. But Commissioner Sobroff, what I will tell you is there's been nothing surprising. I think it's often not understood how much these officers believe and trust in our community and want to do good and interact and engage with our community. And when you sit down with these officers and ask them, what does it mean to them? What is community engagement? The same response prevails, and that's, we want to help, we want to understand, we want to build trust, and we need the tools and the vehicle and the support to do it.
Okay, so that's a perfect segue to Commissioner Kalanche. Before your questions, do you want to make any observations or how is it going? Is it meeting
Sure.
meeting your expectations? What are you learning?
Sure. I'll comment on that, and then I have a couple of questions. So yes, we've been working with the a senior lead committee for me to try to understand what are the challenges for senior lead officers. The senior lead officers are a really important part of the department because they are in every community in LA, and we want to make sure that they have the skills to work effectively in the community, not just as problem solvers, which they're really good at, but also to build the capacity of the community to take on issues on their own. And for me, it's really important to understand the root cause of issues and not just continue to respond to the same issue over and over in the community, but to get at the root cause, build the capacity of the community to address their own issues, and at some point partner with law enforcement and not rely on law enforcement to come in and solve their problems. So that's kind of what we're going, or we're moving towards. And yes, so the summit is really important. It's the first step towards understanding how senior leads see engagement with the community, but also to give them the tools to understand how to identify the root causes of issues, and also how to build the community's capacity so that they're partners and not, not just responding to issues. So that's a step in the right direction, and I look forward to getting feedback from the SLOs to bring it back to the best practices committee. And I really appreciate everybody that's helped to make that happen. My question, I guess, along that same kind of thinking is, I don't know if we've done this already, but I think it's important that we set up some benchmarks or success measures. So for instance, if we're saying we want police officers to engage more with young people, is success that we get 300 more cadets, right? Is that what the measure of success is? Or is success measured by how many young people we reach that normally wouldn't join the cadets, right? So we don't have anything in this document that tells us what success is, because we were always good at recruiting cadets, right? So basically we're just doing the same thing again, right? That maybe had great impacts or maybe okay impacts. So what I think that the missing piece, especially with the community engagement, but I think it pertains to other areas, is identifying a lot of this work rolling out, asking for more budget, understanding what we're striving to achieve, right? So I think that's a missing step in the adding a column that says success is when we recruit cadets, but also when we build relationships with young people ages 16 to 24 that are in the reentry population. I don't know. We could identify what those measures are, but I feel like if we're going to do things differently, we have to think about how to do things differently and how to set those measurements that help us to see or evaluate whether we're meeting those goals. So I would just say that, and Chief Choi and the working group can figure out which of those areas we could set up some measurement goals and some measurement, for evaluation as to like what we're striving to do. So I would say that that's kind of my biggest feedback. It's like, okay, this is great. We're checking off boxes, but what are we trying to achieve? Are we just trying to engage people? Because we do that pretty well, but we need to engage the people that we don't engage with, right? So, and how do we assess that? So I would say that would just be my only recommendation. I'm glad that this work is moving, but we need to set some goals that are different than what our goals have always been.
Any questions?
So that's my feedback. I feel like everything is moving in the right direction, but I would hate to get way down the line and then for us to come back and say, well, you recruited 1,000 cadets, but have you talked to formerly incarcerated youth, or you know what I'm saying? So like, let's identify some goals early on, so that we're doing things a little bit differently.
Great. Commissioner Bonner?
Yes, thank you very much. Just three, I think three questions. The first one, this probably goes to Chief Choi, just broadly speaking, the 41% that's still pending. That's a pretty large number in terms of the chunk of the activity. So of the 41%, is there anything that tells us where that concentration is, or is it spread out across? This may have been in the 184 pages, but I didn't see, I didn't add it up, so to speak. But any idea of what the largest concentration of that is, or how that breaks out, whether you know now or want to send it to me?
I do know. The majority, well, looking through, the majority of that is going to be staffing personnel for the training component. And anything that does say pending, it really is funding for positions to normalize these actions. So we're not doing a one and done type of behavior.
Got it. Okay. Appreciate that. This is probably any of you, but probably Deputy Chief Reyna, probably, since you were mentioning some of the 2-year cycle for the mobile field force training and some of those things. What does that picture look like relative to the training on incident command and that set of issues? So some of that was identified in our conversation as also some perishable skills in that area as well. So what does that look like?
Sure. So we developed a 8-hour class. So I think if you recall, we mentioned that there's a TEACS training, Texas A&M campus. It's a nationally funded training where they have law enforcement, first responder personnel from all around the country come to this very enhanced, in-depth, hardcore type of training of ICS. I went through it myself. I think Chief Choi went through it. We're trying to get our command staff through that. That was one of the first priorities. We've already sent, I believe, 5 through that already. We did develop our own. We wanted to come up with our own type of TEACS training here in LAPD. So we've been working, Dr. Pinal and I, with our Emergency Services Division. We came up with an 8-hour course to put our command staff through that training. That course is pending post-approval and is pending funding. And one of the issues is Emergency Service Division, we've talked about it, is in a sense short-staffed. They do a lot of our planning for major events around the city. That's one of our priorities, to have an additional sergeant and 5 officers assigned to that. It's a line item for the budget, to have that a full-time team to do that training continuously for command staff, and to reintroduce what we call our Hydra Suite. So it's twofold. It's our new ICS course that we've developed as part of this after action, and the Hydra Suite, which I think we talked about is this ongoing scenario type situations where they go in a room and the scenario builds, and it's like an enhanced tabletop type for ICS training. We're also going to take some of this training in our next leads class, which should be coming up here in the fall, and which is our command staff retreat, where they're going to have a full day of ICS training. So we've done some groundwork on that. A lot of that is pending funding and the personnel to be able to put this training on continuously for command staff. But we have shortened versions that we've done, for example, for Super Bowl training, bringing the IMTs, the incident management teams that were assigned to Super Bowl, back together to the DOC and gone through a half day of type of training and ICS stuff to refresh. So those things are right there, and they're kind of those pending that Chief Choi talked about, pending the funding, the staffing, and the cycle to do this. But that will be continuous also once we're in place, to have this training continuous for our command staff throughout the 2-year cycle.
Thank you. And just what's the name of the cadre you mentioned?
So
Hydra?
The Hydra Suite.
How do you spell it?
HYDRA. It's a training that's been around for quite some time. I remember as a sergeant, I went through it years and years ago. It kind of got shelved for a while there. We want to re-implement that Hydra training, but we need upgraded software and upgraded systems for that. That's part of the item, and we need a full-time staff to do that, because we'll have continuous classes going each week and bringing not only command staff, but your lieutenants and your supervisors and some officers through that training continuously to enhance their skills and their training when it comes to ICS protocol.
Got it. Okay. So last question, and this is probably a variation on all of some, the other questions that were asked, but just invite you to go high level to talk a little bit about, in terms of all the training and the thinking and just how things have evolved, and going to Commissioner Sobroff's question about, would we see improved performance if, something happened today? A lot of the training and activity, to me at least, appears to be weighted towards, tactics, or very tactical. This may or may not be accurate, but as I'm hearing it, it weighs, a little bit more towards tactical. And I'm asking a little bit about how, if at all, the training has evolved with regard to strategy. And the couple examples I would, give is, one is, overall posture, the mystery question of, when an unusual occurrence starts, how the department initially responds. If you come in too heavy, may inflame things. If you come in too light, may let things fester. So there's that question, how that's trained, that part of it, that thinking, that discussion of how the department broadly addresses some of these things. And the other example or element of this would be dealing with, the opportunists. So situations where the peaceful protest is woven within the crowds are the people who come here from other places or with other motives to disrupt, to cause trouble. That may invite, law enforcement activity that's, involves less lethal and other kinds of uses of force, but may not, have originated or even be associated with what might have been the underlying original protest. So again, it's a strategic question, at some level about, there's certainly that tactical element to it, but also somewhat of a strategic question about how you're going to, how aggressively you're going to look for that activity. How do you identify it? How do you, deal with it? Make sure others have good information. So using either my construct or some other, my construct being strategy versus tactics, or whatever the construct might be, just speak a little bit about where that part of the preparation is taking place, in terms of how the department overall responds to these kinds of things.
So with our new revamped mobile field force of command and control, it is emphasized regarding first facilitating. When it comes to demonstrations, protests, are we able to facilitate this? That is emphasized. Are we going to be able to allow people to have their First Amendment right to free speech to a point where is it turning criminal in a sense because of what you just said in the latter part of your statement there? So the first emphasis of that training is on facilitating. The second emphasis is on that de-escalation type of point. Do we have to come in, full force? It can be handled by smaller squads. It's discussed, and it's in the tabletops and the scenarios of what exactly do we need? How do we assess this? How is the incident commander or the supervisors communicating and assessing this? And what exactly do we need there? Is it a small group of 30 and we don't need 400 officers type of thing? Assess that and have that communication. So that is talked about in that training and built on that training, then that scenarios. So like you said in the beginning of your statement, we don't want to come in with half the department on a protest of 200 people. Is it needed? I don't think it's needed. And it's based on what is happening in that demonstration, in that protest. The second part of that, the tactics related to people that come into that, when you've seen that before, you have a large demonstration where people are having their First Amendment to free speech for whatever the issue is, and people want to come into that group and they want to be involved in criminal activity. It is discussed in that training of how we're going to identify those people. What exactly is that criminal activity? Is action needed for that criminal activity? Is it just simply somebody happens to be tagging or spray painting a wall? Do we really want to go in and take action on that? Can it wait? Can they be identified? And that's where we talked about this before, our shadow teams. We put in our shadow teams of our undercover plainclothes officers. We have revamped that training. The training bulletin for that is going through the process. It's almost done. All vice officers, narcotics officers, and anyone that'll be part of shadow teams will be on the same page when it comes to those tactics. And it is talked about there again. Do we take action on something simple in the criminal activity? Can we identify that person and get them later? Or is it something that we have to go in and take action? And that's part of the tactics in the mobile field force training of if there's 1 or 2 or 3 people in that group that are committing serious criminal activity, of how we're going to extract those people from the group because they're not part of that First Amendment right to free speech or whatever's happening. They're causing the criminal activity. Remove them and allow that to continue on. So that's all talked about depending on the level and the severity of what's going on.
And I'm sorry, Chief.
Commissioner, I just add to this that one of the learning points that we saw during the aftermath of the civil unrest is a development of an effective EAP, Event Action Plan, which includes the commander's intent, the strategies, the tactics, and anticipates and identifies circumstances that Chief Reyna has discussed. All those avenues, and then a game plan as far as how identify what those tactics will be, as well as the resources that will be employed. And so the training has also been strategically that at the staff, command and staff officer level and then through lieutenants and sergeants about that overarching strategic plan, having contingencies and anticipating potentialities, and then what and how does the plan remain responsive to that, or does it? And so that, for instance, we've had a number of demonstrations and protests over the last month in which we've been effectively able to de-escalate and remove and reassign personnel. The initial description was quite potentially contentious with counter protests and turmoil, but yet as field commanders arrived and assessed, kept resources and out of sight and hide locations, and other instances that kept them active in the surrounding community so that they wouldn't just be bogged down and waiting for a potential scenario. Those are all attributes of training and development, and also articulation and insisting that we plan ahead and that we document that plan ahead so that everyone remains on the same page.
Well, I appreciate that, and we'll probably appreciate some additional conversation on it. What I'm still a little unclear on, and maybe there's not much opportunity to get very clear, like how much of that emerges from those decision making I'm speaking to emerges from the sergeants and the mobile field forces in the field. How much of it comes from the people I'm looking at here, the command staff, and how that part of it works is what I still going to want to understand a little bit better. In addition to probably will want to, and maybe if there's something in the document that, in this last question, you can just, if there's something in the document that tells me a little bit more about the Hydra training and how that's playing out, maybe you can just direct me to that specifically, so I can understand that, not only how cumbersome that is, but how, how much progress is being made in getting people through it as well. So it just invite you, Assistant Chief Choi, if there's on those last points, I'm going to assume that those items are addressed in some way in the 184 pages. If not, we can have a different discussion about it. But if it's in here somewhere, maybe it's as easy as directing me to it, and we'll talk some more about it.
We'll do it, and I'd love to have a conversation with you to talk more about it.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Bonner. And before we do our receive and file, I don't know if that's a motion or just a recommendation. Chief, you alluded sort of back to the consent decree, which was my sort of final question. What similarities and what differences do you see between having gone through the consent decree with another party, a judge watching over, where that isn't the case this time, and being frustrated really and extending the consent decree? What with this after action report, what parallels do you see? What similarities are there? What have we learned from the consent decree? How are we doing this? And what differences?
Well, I think that you're witnessing the model that we learned through the consent decree, which was articulation, having teams of individuals with functional responsibilities, the strategies, the tactics, what are the measures of effectiveness, what's the timeline for accomplishment, and then periodically reporting it. The judge is this panel. The judge is me as well. As the chief, I'm responsible for progress on the multiple fronts of this. And this is being presented to you for receive and file, but it's a lot more than that. This is our report card to you about the first status report. It's also to identify weaknesses, shortfalls, or areas that we need to more fully engage or accomplish. And it's also for you to look, as well as myself and this leadership team, to look with a bit of a, I won't say cynical eye, but a questioning one. Have we accomplished everything we say accomplished? Too easy. It's too easy sometimes to say, been there, done that, done. It's like when we talked about training. Well, we've done mobile field force training, or we've trained an area of command and control or conflict management. We're done. We've got the seal of approval. Well, in reality, What I think the process, the consent decree showed was ongoing inspections, ongoing processes that need to be established so that you have resilience and that you can continue this. And in the area of training, that has been our Achilles heel, and it remains. It's not the checkup for accounting of where we're at. It's the investment and the willingness to put resources in a perishable skill of renewal of a workforce that has a lot on their plate, and keeping them sensitive to the various areas. Again, I'm pleased with the progress to date, and I look forward to the conversations with City Council, and as we move forward with augmenting this with additional resources, so that we can see attain flight altitude and maintain that level of proficiency on multiple fronts, as well as build and improve our technology that will allow us to ensure that we do not repeat the errors that we saw just 2 years ago.
Good. Thank you, Chief. To the city attorney or Mr. Teefank, this is a receive and file. Do we need a motion to do that, or it just is?
You need a motion.
Okay. I will move that we receive and file the department's report. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. No one's opposed. Okay, we'll have a motion for adjournment. There is no closed session today. I'll move adjournment of the meeting.
I'll second.
Commissioner Kalanche seconds. All in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.